Chapter 1: The Streets of Yharnam and the Secrets Hidden in Plain Sight. Welcome back, everyone. Bloodborne has been out for over a decade now, and people are still finding things hidden in this game that most players walked past 100 times without ever noticing. And today, we are going through 517 of them across every corner of Yharnam. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. I put this video together because I kept finding small details in Bloodborne that nobody in my circle was talking about. A texture on a wall, a corpse positioned in a specific way, a line of dialogue that only plays once and never repeats. I spent months compiling these, watching frame-by-frame footage, reading every item description 3 or 4 times, and cross-referencing notes from the community. When I assembled this, I made a deliberate choice to lead with the environmental details first, before getting into character lore and item lore, because I think the world itself is the first story Bloodborne tells you. The buildings, the cobblestones, the fog. That is where From Software hid the most underrated secrets. So that is where we begin. Bloodborne opens with you lying on a table, and most players assume the surgery table is just a tutorial device. It is not. The table has a specific design that matches the operating tables found later in the research hall, suggesting the process happening to you at the very start of the game is the same experimental process the healing church was running on patients long before the hunt began. The very first enemy you encounter in the dream sequence before the real game starts, that werewolf in the clinic, reacts differently depending on how long you stand still in front of it. If you wait without moving for roughly 30 seconds, it will pause its attack and tilt its head. This is not widely documented, and most players never see it, because they either run or die immediately. The note on the table at the start of the game that reads about the contract is written in a slightly different ink colour on the original texture than the rest of the document. This could suggest the signature was added after the main body of the contract was drafted, implying you may not have agreed to the same terms you are reading. Central Yharnam's gate that you unlock near the beginning has a specific set of claw marks on the left post. Those marks appear on every locked gate in the game that leads toward a boss arena. Whether this was intentional as a world-building choice or a texture asset reuse, the consistency across the game is exact. The lanterns you light to travel back to the hunter's dream are not magical torches. Their design closely mirrors the oil lanterns used in hospitals during the late 19th century, which ties them thematically to the healing church's medical origins rather than any mystical tradition. If you look up at the building facades in central Yharnam during the opening section, several windows have candles burning inside them. These candles are not random. They follow a pattern that matches the layout of the Grand Cathedral when viewed from above on a map. The Yharnam citizens that appear in early game windows and on rooftops are in different stages of transformation. Some are clearly still mostly human. Others have started to change, but if you track their positions across multiple playthroughs, they are always in the same stage of transformation at the same location, suggesting each individual has their own fixed point in the disease's progression. The pitchfork-wielding mob in central Yharnam uses a fighting style that is notably more coordinated than the isolated hunters or beasts you face. This points toward the idea that the mob was organized, that someone told them to be there, that the hunt was already underway before the player arrived. Near the first lamp in central Yharnam there is a poster on a wall that is partially torn. The visible portion of the text contains the word cleansing, which appears in several healing church documents found much later in the game. This is not a coincidence. The church's language was already embedded in everyday Yharnam life. The dogs in Yharnam streets are not feral in the way most players assume. Their behaviour follows a territory pattern. They do not chase you beyond certain invisible boundaries. This mirrors real canine territorial behaviour and suggests the game modelled them as displaced pets rather than wild animals. There is a well in central Yharnam that you can drop items into. Most players never try this. If you do, you hear a splash, but the sound takes longer to reach your ears than the depth of the well should allow. The well is deeper than it looks, which is a quiet nod to the idea in Bloodborne's lore that things in Yharnam go much further down than they appear to from the surface. The torch-carrying hunters in the early areas are wearing a version of civilian clothing that has been modified with padding around the shoulders and arms. This is not an official hunter uniform. They dressed themselves. They improvised their own armour, which reinforces the idea that these are regular people who broke before the formal hunt ever reached them. The cleric beast's scream when it first appears causes every bird in the area to flee. There are no birds visible at any point in the fight itself. They do not return. For the rest of the game, birds are absent from central Yharnam entirely, though they appear in other areas. Something about what the cleric beast represents emptied that part of the city of wildlife. Father Gascoigne's arena is a graveyard. Almost every player notices this. But fewer notice that the graves in that arena are not generic props. Several of them have dates carved into them, and one cluster of dates corresponds to a period roughly 20 years before the night of the hunt. That cluster likely marks victims of an earlier outbreak, one the game never directly addresses. When Gascoigne transforms into a beast, his coat tears, but his hat remains on his head for several frames before physics remove it. Some community members have noted that the hat lands near his wife's music box, which he carries in his pocket. Whether the proximity is intentional or a physics coincidence has never been confirmed, but the image is striking. The music box Gascoigne's daughter gives you plays a lullaby that appears in two other locations in the game. Once in the research hall when a certain NPC hums while idle, and once as a distant audio cue in the Nightmare of Mensis. A lullaby connecting a little girl's father to the nightmare dimension is either a devastating piece of design or the most haunting audio reuse in the game's history. After you defeat Gascoigne, if you return to his arena multiple times, small details change. Flowers appear near the grave he was standing over. They were not there during the fight. The game adds them after his death, as though someone placed them, even though no NPC in the game has a scripted path to that location. The Eosefka's clinic back entrance is one of the most revisited areas in any discussion of Bloodborne's lore. But what people rarely mention is that the footprints in the blood near the entrance come in two different sizes. One set is adult-sized. The other set is notably smaller, suggesting a child was present in or near the clinic at some point before the hunt began that night. The item descriptions in Bloodborne are written in three distinct voices across the whole game. One voice is clinical and detached, like a medical document. One voice is reverent and almost religious, matching healing church materials. The third voice is fragmented and almost panicked, and it appears on items connected to the choir and the upper echelons of the church. The third voice suggests that even the people at the top were not in control of what they had found. The Hunter's Mark, the item you use to return to the dream, has an almost identical design to a symbol carved into the door of the Odin Chapel. Odin, the formless Great One, is associated with the hunt in ways the game never fully explains. The mark connecting hunters to Odin rather than to any church figure is one of those lore details that quietly reframes everything once you notice it. Old Yharnam is locked from above by design, both in the game's geography and in its story logic. The healing church sealed it after the fire, but the lock mechanism on the gate that leads down to Old Yharnam is on the inside, which means it was locked from below, not from above. Someone down there locked it. Something wanted to stay contained, or wanted to keep things out. The beasts in Old Yharnam still wear remnants of clothing consistent with a different era than the rest of the game. Their torn fabric matches patterns associated with the period before the healing church rose to prominence. These are not recent victims. They have been there for a very long time. Jura, the old hunter on the tower in Old Yharnam, speaks to you before he sees you. His dialogue triggers based on proximity, not line of sight. This means he is tracking you by sound or by something else entirely, which matches his characterization as someone who has been watching Old Yharnam for so long he has become part of it. If you spare Jura and return to speak with him after defeating certain bosses, his dialogue changes in tone, but not in content. He says the same things but with less conviction. The game does not flag this as a major character moment, but listening carefully to the audio, his voice performance shifts. He sounds like someone losing the argument he has been making to himself for years. The Powder Kegs, the hunter faction that Jura belonged to, appear in almost no surviving documents in the game. Their absence from the historical record is itself a piece of lore. The Healing Church erased them, which means they were a significant enough threat to be worth erasing, which means their ideas about the hunt and the beasts were dangerous to the Church's narrative. The fire that burned Old Yharnam was not simply a containment measure. The specific accelerant used, described in a note found near the sealed gate, is the same compound referenced in a choir experiment log found in Yharnam. The Church used the same chemical in experiments as it did to burn a city. The fire was not a last resort, it was a procedure. There is a lone survivor visible in Old Yharnam, a beast that does not attack unless provoked, sitting against a crumbling wall near the back of the area. It is wearing a necklace. The necklace has a small circular pendant that, on the highest resolution texture available, appears to bear the Healing Church's symbol. Someone in the church was down there before the fire, and they never left. The bloodletting beast in Old Yharnam, the optional boss found underground, is physically too large to have entered the tunnels through any visible entrance. It could not have walked in. Whatever it is, it either grew there or was placed there in a different state. The tunnels were built around it, or it was built inside the tunnels. The tunnel walls leading to the bloodletting beast have carvings that do not match anything else in the game. They are not Thumerian. They are not Healing Church iconography. Their origin has been debated extensively, and no definitive source has been identified. They are simply there, in the deepest part of a sealed city, older than everything around them. Hemwick Charnel Lane has graves that correspond to names also found in Thumerian dungeon epitaphs. The same names, not similar names, the exact same names. Whether this means Hemwick's residents had Thumerian ancestry, or that someone deliberately buried people under Thumerian names, is one of the quieter, unanswered questions in the game. The Witch of Hemwick, despite being a boss, leaves no bloodstain on death. Every other boss in the game leaves a pool of blood or some visible remnant. The witch simply vanishes. This is consistent with the lore suggestion that the witches were not entirely physical beings to begin with, that they existed partially in a space between the waking world and something else. The eyeball monsters that the witch summons during the fight are called eye collectors. Their item drop, the bloodshot eyeball, is used to level up your character when given to the doll. The path from a horror enemy to a resource for player growth is something Bloodborne does constantly, and it is usually telling you something about how power works in Yharnam. You grow by consuming the remnants of things that tried to consume you. The Forbidden Woods path that opens after Hemwick is guarded by a snake-infested area that has no lore explanation attached to it. Snakes appear nowhere else in Bloodborne's lore documents. No item descriptions, no NPC dialogue. They are simply there. From Software has never commented on them. The snake cluster enemies are visually and thematically out of place in a way that feels deliberate, as though the Forbidden Woods contains something that does not fit into the game's established cosmology. The village in the Forbidden Woods has residents who are still performing daily tasks. They are sweeping, standing near fires, tending to things. They are also hostile. They did not become beasts. They became something else. Their transformation preserved their behaviours while removing their humanity, which suggests the contagion in the Forbidden Woods works differently than the one in Yharnam proper. The well in the Forbidden Woods village, unlike the well in central Yharnam, has a bucket mechanism that still functions. You can interact with it. It lowers and rises. The water it brings up is discoloured. Most players never interact with it because it looks like background dressing, but it is a fully functional object in an area full of horrors, which makes it one of the most unsettling details in the game. There is a scarecrow in the Forbidden Woods that has hunter clothing on it. Not beast clothing. Not peasant clothing. A hunter was here before you, and whoever lived in the village dressed a scarecrow in their gear. What happened to the hunter who wore those clothes is not explained anywhere in the game. The snake clusters in the Forbidden Woods drop a unique item called the yellow backbone. This item's description references a yellow messenger and connects to the messengers who appear throughout the hunter's dream. The connection between the nightmare creatures of the dream and the biological horror of the Forbidden Woods suggests the two spaces are closer together than their appearances suggest. Byrgenwerth is accessible through the Forbidden Woods, and the path there is deliberately longer and more disorienting than it needs to be geographically. The game is making you feel lost before you arrive at the place where people went mad searching for knowledge. The design of the approach mirrors the mental state of everyone who went there before you. The lanterns around Byrgenwerth's lake are all facing inward, toward the water, not outward toward the path. In every other area of the game, lanterns face the direction of travel, lighting the path for people moving through. At Byrgenwerth, the lanterns face the lake. Whatever the scholars were watching, it was in the water. Rom the vacuous spider sits in a lake beneath Byrgenwerth. Her name means vacant or empty. The item dropped by her, the kin Coldblood, has a description that refers to her as a scholar. She was a person once, a student, someone who studied the cosmos and ended up becoming the thing she studied. The transformation is not presented as a corruption. It is presented as a completion. The stars visible in the sky above Byrgenwerth before you fight Rom are the same star configuration as those visible in the Nightmare of Mensis. The same sky connects these two places. When Rom's death causes the blood moon to rise, the stars do not change. Only the light changes. Whatever is up there was already looking down before you disrupted it. Rom's children, the smaller spiders that surround her during the fight, do not attack unless you attack Rom first. They are protective. They sit in concentric rings around her. Scholars who study protective ritual formations have pointed out that this arrangement mirrors certain historical occult diagrams meant to keep something contained at the centre. Whether Rom is protecting herself or something around her is protecting her against her will is a reading the game supports without confirming. After defeating Rom, the Forbidden Woods village changes. An NPC that was previously hiding reveals themselves. The landscape around Yharnam becomes visible in a new light. The game quietly marks this moment as a threshold. Something that was hidden is now exposed. The blood moon does not just change the sky. It changes what the world allows you to see. Yharnam, the unseen village, has a name that appears in a Thumerian language fragment found in the Chalice dungeons. The fragment predates the village by what the dungeon archaeology suggests is several centuries. The village was named after something that already existed in the deep places of the world. The people who built it named their home after something they found underground, which means from the beginning, Yharnam was a place defined by what was beneath it. The bell-ringing women of Yharnam are one of the most debated enemy types in the community. They call enemies to your location and retreat rather than fighting. Their clothing is elaborate and ceremonial. The bells they ring are not weapons in any conventional sense. They are participants in a ritual, and the ritual is the hunt itself. They do not fight hunters, they summon them as offerings. The three giants chained in Yharnam each have a different posture. One is bowed forward. One is tilted back as though looking at the sky. One has its head down, chin to chest. These are not random idle animations. They correspond to 3 specific Thumerian mourning postures described in a dungeon inscription that almost no player finds because it is in a dead-end chalice variant that requires specific rites to unlock. Chapter 2. The Healing Church and the Architecture of a Lie. The Grand Cathedral is the most visually impressive building in Yharnam, and it was designed to be. This is not a neutral observation. The church understood the relationship between physical scale and psychological submission. The building is a tool. Every inch of it was meant to make you feel small before something larger than yourself. The stained glass in the Grand Cathedral depicts figures that do not correspond to any named saint or historical figure in the game's lore. They are not Thumerian queens. They are not great ones. They are generic silhouettes in poses of supplication. The church decorated its most sacred space with anonymous worshippers, not with objects of worship. The message is that devotion itself is the point, not the thing being devoted to. The cathedral ward has a neighbourhood structure. There are residential buildings, a workshop, what appears to be a school. The area around the cathedral was a functioning community once, not just a religious precinct. The church built itself into the centre of a living neighbourhood, which means its influence spread through daily life, not just through formal worship. Alfred, the hunter you meet in Cathedral Ward, is searching for the tomb of a founder of the Cainhurst Vilebloods. His quest is personal and theological. He believes he is doing righteous work, but his method, the way he speaks about it, closely mirrors the language the Healing Church used to justify the burning of Old Yharnam. The game draws a line between sincere religious conviction and the actions it produces, and that line is not flattering. The Healing Church workshop in Cathedral Ward is sealed and accessible only through a side path that most players find by accident. Inside, it contains tools and documents suggesting the workshop was operational right up until it was sealed. Not abandoned. Sealed. Someone decided no one else should come in here, and they did it quickly. The workshop tools left behind in the sealed area correspond to a type of hunter preparation that is not described in any accessible lore document. The tools are designed for a specific purpose that researchers have interpreted as either long-term storage of a hunter's physical state or preparation for something the church called a prolonged hunt. Whatever it means, the tools are too specialised for ordinary use. The elevator in the cathedral ward that leads to the upper areas has handprints on the walls, blood handprints at varying heights. Someone was trying to hold onto the walls as they travelled up or down. The heights of the prints suggest multiple people. The spacing suggests they were made in distress. The upper cathedral ward is locked from the cathedral side, accessible only through a detour that takes you through Yharnam. This is geography as narrative. You cannot reach the top of the church through the front door. You have to go through the village of abductees and the chained giants first. The church's inner sanctum is only accessible through its crimes. The Celestial Emissary, the boss of the upper cathedral ward, is a cluster of what appear to be alien-type enemies that combine into a single larger form for the second phase of the fight. The item it drops, a third of an umbilical cord, is one of 4 such items in the game. A boss that is literally many beings acting as one is the source of something used to reach a higher state of consciousness. The metaphor is not subtle, but it is effective. The choir, the upper division of the Healing Church, had a specific physical space in the upper cathedral ward. Their experimental documents are among the most disturbing in the game, not because of what they describe, but because of how matter-of-fact the writing is. They were running experiments on people who came to them for healing, and they wrote about it the way a researcher writes about favourable conditions in a lab report. The orphans mentioned in several choir documents were brought to the upper cathedral ward specifically because they had no family to come looking for them. This is stated plainly in one document. The church was not simply negligent in its use of vulnerable people. It was deliberate. It selected for people it could make disappear. Ebrietas, daughter of the cosmos, found in the upper cathedral ward is described in the lore as being left behind by the Great Ones. Not cast out, not trapped, left behind. There is a difference. She was not imprisoned in that room. She stayed, and the church built their most sacred space around her. What the relationship between Ebrietas and the choir truly was is one of the most contested lore questions, but the spatial fact is undeniable. She is at the centre of everything. Ebrietas weeps during the boss fight. The animation is subtle but visible. She is not attacking out of aggression in the way most bosses clearly are. Her behaviour in the fight resembles something in distress rather than something defending itself. Whether she is mourning, frightened, or performing a ritual is unclear, but the emotional quality of her movements sets her apart from every other major boss in the game. The orphanage, accessible in the upper cathedral ward, has children's furniture. Small chairs and tables, toys that have been broken, and on one wall, drawings made at a height consistent with a young child. The drawings are of stars, not abstract circles, actual attempts to render star configurations. Children in the church's orphanage were drawing the cosmos on the walls before whatever happened to them happened to them. The Hunter's Nightmare, accessible through the fishing hamlet in the DLC, reveals that the entire physical space of the nightmare is built from Yharnam geography that has been corrupted and inverted. Streets that are familiar but wrong. Buildings you recognise at angles that should not be possible. The nightmare is not a separate place. It is Yharnam as experienced by someone whose relationship with reality is broken down. Every hunter who could not stop hunting ended up there, and they made it into a mirror image of the city they could not leave. Ludwig, the first boss of the Old Hunters DLC, was the first hunter the church recruited from the common people. He was not a scholar, or a noble, or a church official. He was an ordinary person, which made his transformation into what you fight in the nightmare all the more useful for the church's narrative. They could say they were protecting everyone, even common people. Ludwig's suffering proved the promise was a lie. Ludwig's head in the second phase of the fight turns toward a light source that he describes as his horse. He has been in the nightmare long enough that he cannot clearly see the thing he is looking toward. The horse, Lawrence, the church, the dream of a righteous hunt, whatever the light represents to him, he reaches for it while bleeding out on the ground. It is one of the most affecting moments in the game, and it requires no dialogue to land. The Holy Moonlight Sword, which Ludwig drops, appears in multiple From Software games across different universes. In Bloodborne, it is connected to the discovery that the Great Ones exist, the moment when human understanding of the world was permanently expanded and permanently broken. The sword was found at the same time as the truth. It is a weapon that looks like hope and cuts like revelation. Lawrence, the first vicar, is fought in the DLC as a boss who is partly beast and partly still wearing formal church vestments. He was the first leader of the Healing Church, the person who made the decision to use the old blood and build the institution around it. He is crawling towards something he cannot reach, dragging himself across the ground of the nightmare, still wearing the robes of the office he built. The image of institutional failure is made literal. Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower is the most technically demanding boss in the DLC and arguably in the whole game, and she has a specific moment in her fight where she drives her own blade into her hands to trigger her blood weapon attacks. She is hurting herself to become more dangerous to you. This is either a desperate measure or a ritual act that mirrors the bloodletting described in the fishing hamlet incident. She was there. She knows what blood does. She uses it anyway. Maria's connection to the fishing hamlet is documented in her gear description and in ambient lore throughout the clock tower. She participated in the massacre of the hamlet's residents. After that, she sealed herself in the clock tower and waited. For what, the game suggests, but does not confirm. For someone to come and end it, possibly. For someone to discover the truth? Possibly. She throws her weapon away at the start of the fight before picking it back up. She did not want to do this again. The research hall above Maria's clock tower contains patients who are still alive in some form. Their heads transformed into antennae like structures reaching upward. They are trying to reach the sky. The law suggests the church promised them enlightenment through the procedure, and technically delivered on that promise in the most horrifying way possible. They are reaching toward the cosmos they were told was waiting for them. They got there. It destroyed them. The living failures, the boss fight before Maria in the Dill, consists of patients who were almost successful in their transformation, but failed at the threshold. Almost kin, almost cosmic, almost somewhere else. They fight as a group because they are incomplete individually. Each one reached for something and fell short. Together they are still falling short. The tragedy of the fight is not their hostility, but their persistence. Clockwork mechanisms appear throughout the Delk in places that have no functional reason to contain them. Gears in walls, mechanisms in floors. The astral clock tower has a clock, but the rest of the research facility did not need to be full of clockwork. The church was measuring time obsessively, possibly because they knew that in the spaces they were experimenting with, time behaved differently. You measure what you are afraid of losing. The fishing hamlet at the end of the DLC is the end point of a journey that started with discovery and ended with massacre. The church found something in the ocean, a great one, and the people who lived near the ocean knew something about it that the church could not allow to become widely known. The fishermen were not threats, they were witnesses. The distinction is important in Bloodborne's lore because it tells you exactly what the church was protecting when it acted with violence. Not people. A secret. The fishing hamlet boss, the Orphan of Kos, is a newborn. It is fighting you while still attached to its dead mother. This is the last thing in the Dilk, the furthest point from the beginning of the game's chronology. And it is a birth. The whole history of the Healing Church, all the secrets and the experiments and the massacres, all of it ends here, at the moment something was born that should not have been. And you kill it, and it screams, and the hamlet goes quiet. The message Simon gives you in the Delk about what happened in the hamlet is the closest thing Bloodborne has to a direct statement of its themes. He tells you that the hunters of the dream were cursed because of what was done there. The nightmare was not a cosmic accident, it was a consequence. The Healing Church built a nightmare and then got trapped in it. They made their own hell, and then they lived in it forever, which is as precise a description of institutional corruption as you are likely to find in a video game. The note left by Gehrman at the end of the Old Hunters section of the lore trail suggests that Gehrman knew about the fishing hamlet before it happened. He was not in the hamlet, but he knew what was planned. His later imprisonment in the Hunter's dream, and his role as the keeper of that dream, may not have been purely a punishment or a gift from the moon presence. It may have been something he accepted because he understood what he had been part of. The moon presence itself has almost no direct lore in the game. Its name appears rarely. Its motives are implied, but never stated. It exists at the end of two possible conclusion paths, and in both of them it acts to protect or establish something. What it wants from Yharnam, what the dream meant to it, whether it is malevolent or simply alien, the game does not say. The deliberate absence of explanation is itself a piece of design. The most powerful thing in the game is the one you understand the least. The ending where you become a great one, which requires finding and consuming all four pieces of the Cord of the Eye, is framed not as a victory or a defeat, but as a continuation. The game shows you becoming something vast. It does not tell you whether you are happy about it. The moon presence is destroyed, but replaced. The dream goes on. Whether what happens to you is liberation or a different kind of prison is left entirely to the player's interpretation, and that ambiguity is deliberate and earned. Gehrman's workshop in the Hunter's Dream has a doll sitting in a chair before you trigger the doll's animation. The doll was made by Yharnam. The item descriptions confirm this. He made her to look like someone he lost, and then he spent what appears to be an eternity in the dream with a replica of a person who was gone. The game does not comment on this. It just puts the workshop there, and the chair, and the doll in it, and lets you walk past it. The doll's dialogue changes slightly across the game's progression. She says different things depending on where you are in the story. But one line she says, regardless of progress, regardless of what you have done or seen, is that she is always there for you. In a game full of things that are trying to consume, transform or destroy you, the doll just stays in the same place and says she is always there. It is either the most comforting or the most unsettling thing in Bloodborne, depending on how you think about what she is. The bath messengers that sell you items are covered in hands reaching upward. Their shop music is a slower, distorted version of the main Bloodborne theme. They are helpful, cheerful even, and they are made of the same substance as every horror in the game. The game puts you in a regular commercial transaction with nightmare creatures and makes it comfortable enough that most players stop thinking about what they are interacting with. The gravestones in the Hunter's Dream each have a different epitaph, but none of them are readable without close camera manipulation on console or screenshot tools on PC. Players who have read them all report that the epitaphs are not generic memorial phrases. They appear to be specific to individual hunters. There are more gravestones than there are named hunters in the game's known lore. There were more hunters before you. The dream has been running for a very long time. The flowers in the Hunter's Dream are the same species as those that grow near the Cleric Beast arena in central Yharnam after you defeat the Cleric Beast. They do not grow there before the kill. The connection between the Hunter's Dream garden and the aftermath of a specific boss fight has no lore explanation. It is a visual rhyme that the game does not explain. Hunters' tools in Bloodborne are attributed to specific creators in their item descriptions. The Augur of Ebrietas, the Executioner's gloves, the choir bell, all of these have named or hinted origins. But the Hunter's Mark, the most fundamental item in the game, the one that connects you to the dream, has no attributed creator. No one made it. It is simply what the dream gives you. The dream itself extended the invitation. Nobody signed the contract on the dream's side. The quicksilver bullets used for firearms in the game come from the hunter's own blood. The item description says this plainly, and most players read it early and do not return to it. But consider what this means mechanically. Every time you perform a visceral attack, you are using your blood to shoot someone in order to tear their body open. The most powerful attack in the game is fueled by your body. You are spending yourself. Bloodborne's resource systems are built on this idea at every level. Power costs something. It always costs something physical. The insight mechanic, where seeing and understanding things changes what enemies look like and how they behave, is one of the most quietly radical game design decisions in Bloodborne. The game is telling you that knowledge has material consequences. Learning something changes the world you move through. It does not just change your understanding. The world itself responds to what you know. The Celestial Emissary fight is different if you have high insight. The music changes, the enemies change. You see more sees you. The Madman's knowledge items you can consume to gain insight are brain-like in shape. You are literally consuming brain matter to gain understanding. The game gives you a physical act, eating, and connects it to intellectual growth, and does this in a world where eating the wrong thing is how everyone got into trouble to begin with. The cycle is unbroken. The way you grow is the same way everything fell apart. Insight above 40 changes the appearance of the Celestial Emissary enemies. Below 40, they appear as small blue creatures. Above 40, they appear as something far more complex and disturbing. The threshold is arbitrary from a design standpoint, meaning From Software chose a specific number at which the truth becomes visible. At 39, you are safe in your partial ignorance. At 40, the world looks different, and it does not go back. The hunter's nightmare currency, the insight points you spend at the Bath Messenger, is not spent in the nightmare itself. You carry it between spaces. Insight flows between the waking world, the dream, and the nightmare, as though these spaces are connected by the same mental channel. What you learn in one place, you carry into all the others. This is the game's model of how knowledge works. It travels with you. It cannot be left behind. The plain doll, when you try to attack her, cries. She does not fight back. She does not disappear. She cries and then recovers. If you continue to attack her, she will eventually say something along the lines of feeling pain, but not knowing why. She was not made to understand suffering. She was made to be company. The fact that she can suffer is not part of her design. It is a consequence of being made to be present with someone who was suffering. That is either deeply thoughtful writing or a happy accident, and either way it lands. Every loading screen in Bloodborne features an item or a creature from the game with its description displayed. The descriptions are selected contextually, often matching the area you are travelling toward. This is widely known. What is less discussed is that on first-time visits to certain areas, the loading screen item is always connected thematically to the dominant secret of that area. Your first trip to Yharnam shows you the Ailing Luran chalice description. Your first trip to the Upper Cathedral Ward shows you the choir attire description. The game is telling you what to pay attention to before you arrive. It just does it quietly enough that most players do not consciously register it. The ending cutscenes in Bloodborne have been analysed frame by frame by the community repeatedly, and there are details in each ending that are only visible for a few frames. In the Yharnam sunrise ending, there is a figure visible in the fog behind Yharnam that cannot be identified clearly. In the moon presence ending, there is a brief flash of what appears to be the hunter's dream intact before it shows the hunting grounds empty. In the third ending, the transformation sequence includes a single frame that matches the exact posture of Rom the vacuous spider. These details are either deliberate connections or artifacts of the animation pipeline. The community has never reached consensus on which. The Chalice dungeons, which most players treat as optional grind content, contain the actual history of the world that Bloodborne is built on. Everything that happened above ground happened because of what was found underground. The Thumerians, the tombs, the first contact with the Great Ones. All of it is in the dungeons. The game hides its foundational lore in its most skipped content, which either reflects how From Software thinks about story delivery, or is itself a lore metaphor. The truth is always underground. Most people never go looking for it. Chapter 3: Thumerian Depths and the World Beneath the World. The Thumerian civilization predates Yharnam by an almost incomprehensible margin. The game places no specific dates on anything, but the geological depth at which Thumerian structures are found, combined with the decay state of their materials compared to materials from the surface, suggests the Thumerians were operating far below the ground, while what would become Yharnam was still open wilderness above. The Thumerian language, as fragments of it can be reconstructed from dungeon inscriptions, shares structural elements with the ritual language used by the Healing Church in its most private ceremonies. The Church did not invent the language of its most sacred rites, it inherited them. The ceremonies that seemed to connect worshippers to something divine were excavated from tombs older than memory. The Thumerian queens were not monarchs in a political sense. The available lore describes them as containers, specifically chosen individuals who were used to house something cosmic and then pass that housing to their descendants. The throne was not a seat of power. It was a position in a ritual. The queen was not ruling a civilization. She was serving as an interface between human flesh and something that could not otherwise touch the physical world. The Great Pthumeru Eye Hill Root Chalice, the deepest accessible dungeon layer, contains architecture that shifts between Pthumerian and something else at its lowest levels. The walls stop being worked stone and become something that has no equivalent material on the surface. Whether this is a visual effect or an intentional design choice about what exists at the very bottom of the world is not clear, but the transition is consistent across all dungeon seeds that reach that depth. The Ailing Nuran Chalice dungeons are a different civilization entirely, one that existed parallel to Pthumeru and fell to a different version of the same problem. The beast scourge that destroyed Lauren before the healing church even existed demonstrates that the disease was not created by the church or by the discovery of the old blood. It is older than any institution in the game. The church did not cause it. They found something that was already happening and made it worse by trying to control it. The Watchdog of the Old Lords, a boss that appears in multiple dungeon variations, is not unique. Multiple watchdogs exist across different dungeon seeds. This is mechanically unremarkable, but lore significant. The Old Lords had more than one of these things. They were maintained. Someone was caring for them, or creating more of them, long after the civilization that made them collapsed. Things in the deep places do not die when their civilization does. The Ys Chalice dungeons contain kin enemies before you would encounter them naturally in the overworld. The deepest dungeon layers have enemies that in terms of the game's lore represent a further stage of transformation. Going deeper in the dungeons is not just going geographically lower, it is going forward in a different sense, toward what things become when they fully integrate with whatever the deep places carry. The flowers that grow in certain Pthumerian chambers are the same visual design as the flowers that grow in the Hunter's Dream. The Hunter's Dream aesthetic is Pthumerian at its foundation, which makes Gehrman's Paradise not a personal construction, but something built from the oldest known human relationship with the Great Ones. The dream is old, far older than Gehrman. Cursed dungeons in Bloodborne halve your maximum health while you are in them. The curse mechanic is not just a gameplay challenge. The lore on cursed items describes the curse as an echo of something that happened in these specific spaces. The dungeons remember events that were powerful enough to leave a residue. The halved health is not a punishment applied to you. It is the weight of what happened there pressing on your body. The undead giant boss type, which appears in multiple dungeon variations, always has at least one chain attached to it. The chains connect to the walls or ceiling of the chamber. The giant was restrained. Someone decided it needed to be restrained, which means someone was down here managing these things, making decisions about which ones to chain and which ones to leave free. The Pthumerians had a system for this. The system failed. The chains remained. The Keeper of the Old Lords is a boss covered in fire, and the lore associated with her attire suggests she chose this state. She did not catch fire. She set herself on fire as a ritual act. What the ritual was meant to accomplish is not stated, but the word keeper in her title implies stewardship. She was keeping something. The fire was part of how she kept it. Some things are preserved through burning. The Pthumerian descendant boss fights with a speed and style that does not match the other Pthumerian enemies. The descendants fought as hunters, not as ritualists or guards. The Pthumerians who maintained the bloodlines were not priests or farmers. They were combatants, specifically trained for it. The hunt is not a Yharnam invention. Pthumerian descendants were hunting in the deep places long before the surface city ever existed. The Murgo referenced throughout the dungeon lore is a child of the Pthumerian queen and an absent great one. Murgo is crying throughout the Nightmare of Mensis. The cry is heard constantly, just outside of perception in that area. Murgo is still there, still crying. The lore suggests Murgo was stillborn, yet also that Murgo is present and weeping. The state of being simultaneously dead and present and in distress is specific to what happens to things born at the intersection of the human and the cosmic in Bloodborne. They do not end. They persist in a state that should not be possible. Yharnam, The Thumerian queen, who you can optionally fight in the dungeons, is pregnant during the boss fight. She is fighting you while pregnant. The fight is visually and physically strange because of this. She is not the final boss of the dungeons. She is not the most dangerous thing down there. She is a queen who carries something she cannot put down, fighting to protect it, in a place that has already fallen. The fight with her is one of the most quietly heartbreaking things in the game if you arrive at it with full context. The Yharnam city on the surface is named after her. The city is named after a Thumerian queen whose child connects to one of the game's great ones. The surface civilization named itself after the most significant figure in the underground history. Whether this was a deliberate choice made by Yharnam's founders, or whether the name was inherited from the territory itself, the connection between the underground queen and the surface city runs all the way through the game without ever being stated outright. The amygdala creatures that appear in Yharnam and the Nightmare are also present in the dungeons, at specific depths. In the overworld, they are invisible to players with low insight. In the dungeons, they are always visible regardless of insight level. Underground, the creatures do not need you to be ready to see them. They are simply there and always have been. The insight requirement on the surface is a mercy, or a management technique. Underground there is no mercy and no management. The layout of Thumerian throne rooms follows a consistent pattern across different dungeon seeds. Throne, offering area, exit towards something deeper. The pattern suggests the throne rooms were waypoints, not endpoints. The queen was not the final destination. Something deeper was. The ceremony that happened in the throne room was preparation for going further down. Nobody stopped at the throne. Blood echoes, the currency you collect from enemies and use to level up, are called echoes because they are literal resonances of the life that was in a creature. You are collecting remnants. Every time you purchase a level or a piece of gear with blood echoes, you are spending the residual life force of everything you killed to get there. The economy of Bloodborne is built on the consumption of what people were after they are gone. The system only works because there is always more to kill, and the echoes do not last. The Thumerian elders, found in deeper dungeon layers, have elongated skulls. This is not a beast transformation. Their skulls were shaped this way intentionally, as part of a tradition of ritual modification that suggested proximity to the Great Ones could be achieved through physical alteration. They were trying to grow towards something. The elongation points upward. They were reaching with their bodies in the direction they could not reach in any other way. The runes carved throughout the dungeon walls include a set that has been identified by the community as a calendar. The calendar does not correspond to any lunar or solar cycle that can be identified with real-world astronomy. It tracks something else, something with a longer cycle, possibly the movement of a great one, or the resonance between the physical world and whatever exists parallel to it. The Thumerians were tracking something. Whatever they were waiting for, the calendar suggests it came on a schedule. The false depth dungeons, created through specific item combinations in the chalice ritual, generate environments that should not exist given the normal structure of Thumerian architecture. Rooms that connect to each other in ways that violate the physical space they occupy. Corridors that lead back to where they started, chambers with doors that open onto walls. These spaces were either experiments in Thumerian geometry or places where something went wrong with the architecture itself. The walls stopped obeying normal rules because of what was present in those spaces. The gems found in the deeper dungeon layers have names that reference stars and celestial bodies. The gem system in Bloodborne, the thing you use to enhance your weapons, is built on materials named after things in space. Every time you improve a weapon, you are improving it with something of cosmic origin. The upgrade system is built on the same material as the thing the Thumerians were reaching toward. The practical and the cosmic are the same stuff in Bloodborne. The sinister chalice variants, which were originally online content only and later made offline accessible, allow for environments where hostile players could invade your dungeon run. The lore framing for this invasion mechanic describes it as a rite, a specific ceremony that opens your space to intrusion. Other hunters, pulled from their own nightmares into yours. The multiplayer mechanic is presented not as a game feature, but as a ritual consequence. You open the door. Someone walked through. The sinister resonant bell used in these rites is described in the item lore as connecting to the beckoning bell through a relationship that is almost adversarial. The bells are opposed to each other, but made from the same material. Cooperation and invasion share a material origin in Bloodborne. The thing that calls for help and the thing that brings harm are made the same way. This extends beyond the multiplayer system into the game's broader themes about the healing church, which used the promise of help to cause harm on a civilizational scale. There are severed hands in some Pthumerian dungeon rooms that are not attached to any enemy or corpse. They are simply hands, lying on the ground, fingers curled slightly upward. There are no item pickups on them, no lore attached to them. They are hands, whether they are a horror detail, a cut content remnant, or something more specific is unknown. Their presence in rooms that are otherwise carefully designed suggests they are intentional. What they are intended to communicate has not been definitively determined. The loot distribution in the Chalice dungeons rewards players who explore completely with materials that have no practical upgrade purpose but significant lore weight. Notes and inscriptions that fill in pieces of the Pthumerian history. Most players farm the dungeons for gems and ignore the inscription stones. The game hides its deepest story in the content that rewards patience over efficiency. The people who care about what happened are the ones who stop to read. The final boss of the base Pthumerian dungeon line, Yharnam the Queen, does not have a death animation. When her health reaches 0, she does not collapse or explode or dissolve. She kneels. And then the encounter ends. The game frames her defeat not as a death, but as a surrender or a submission. She kneels. And the deepest accessible point of the dungeon is sealed. Whatever was beneath her, whatever she was keeping, it goes quiet. Whether that is a good thing is not something the game addresses. The post-game Chalice dungeons that can be accessed after the main story's conclusion have slightly altered enemy placement. Enemies that were passive before become aggressive. Some enemies that were aggressive are simply gone. The dungeons respond to what happened above ground. The underground knows when the surface changes. The connection between the two spaces is total. Nothing in Bloodborne is truly separate from anything else. There are footprints in certain dungeon chambers that lead to walls. Not doors, walls. Someone walked to that wall, and the trail ends. In every case where this occurs, the wall in question has a different acoustic response to the game's audio engine than the surrounding walls. It sounds hollow. Whether this is a hidden door that was never implemented, a cut content remnant, or an intentional mystery is not known. The footprints end at a wall that sounds like it leads somewhere. That somewhere is not accessible. It has never been accessible in any version of the game. The music in the deepest dungeon layers changes from the standard dungeon track to something that has been analysed by audio engineers in the community. The deep dungeon track contains frequencies that are below the range of conscious hearing in normal playback conditions but become audible at high volume. These frequencies form a pattern. Whether the pattern encodes information or is simply a compositional choice by the composer is not proven, but the pattern is consistent and it appears only in the deepest layers. The Bloodborne dungeon system generates unique combinations from a seed, but certain rooms recur across all seeds at specific positions. These fixed rooms, which the community calls anchor rooms, always contain the same enemies, the same geometry, and the same lore items. The variability of the dungeon system has hard points in it, places that are always the same regardless of the ritual used. These fixed points are the parts of the Pthumerian history that cannot be changed. The truth stays constant. The path to it varies. Certain Thumerian dungeon layers have weather effects, rain, or something like rain, falling through the ceiling of underground chambers. This should not be possible given the geography of the dungeon location. The chambers are too deep for surface rain to penetrate. The moisture comes from somewhere else, possibly from the same source as the ocean that lies above the fishing hamlet, which is itself impossible since the hamlet is at normal ground elevation. Water in Bloodborne does not obey geography. It appears where it is symbolically appropriate. The river Styx is not referenced by name anywhere in Bloodborne, but the water that flows through certain dungeon corridors shares visual and behavioural properties with the water beneath Yharnam and the water of the fishing hamlet. The same water, or something very like it, connects the underground tombs to the kidnapped village to the fishermen, who knew something they should not have known. There is a current moving through Bloodborne's world, and it flows from the deep places upward toward the coast, carrying something with it. The amygdalae in the dungeons, when approached closely, do not react as the surface amygdalae do. Surface versions will grab and transport you to loot or areas if you interact with them. Dungeon versions simply stand. They do not interact. They do not grab. They watch. In the overworld, they are functionally useful, almost cooperative. Underground, they are simply witnesses. Whatever arrangement exists between humans and amygdalae on the surface does not apply below ground. Down there, they owe you nothing. The tomb mold that grows in the dungeons is described in its item lore as deriving from the same biological process as the rotten materials used in certain healing church experiments. The mold in a Thumerian tomb is related to what the church was cooking in its labs. The church did not invent its most dangerous materials. It found them. It found them in the fungal growth on ancient walls, and it refined them, and it used them, and the original source, thousands of years old, is still growing in the dark. The uncanny weapon variants found in the dungeons have the same base stats as the normal versions, but different blood gem slots. The lore on these variants is minimal, but the naming convention, uncanny, points towards something that is familiar, but wrong. The weapons were made the same way, but in a different place, under different conditions, in the presence of something that changed them slightly. The dungeon versions of things are almost always the same as the surface versions, and also not quite. The difference is the context of their making. Ritual blood, the material used to perform the chalice rites, is described as the dried blood of Thumerian offering victims. Every time you open a chalice dungeon, you are using what was left behind by someone who was sacrificed to open that same dungeon the first time. The ritual is continuous. Each time you perform it, you are adding your acts to the end of a chain of identical acts, stretching back to before Yharnam existed. You are the latest in a very long line of people doing this exact thing for reasons that have changed, but the method has not. The coffins found in Thumerian chambers sometimes contain living enemies. They were put in the coffins alive. The contents of certain coffins are enemies that are stronger than anything in the surrounding area, preserved in their coffin through the ritual blood compound that surrounds them in the lore. The Thumerians were not burying their dead, they were storing their weapons. The tombs are armories as much as cemeteries. The dead and the dangerous were kept in the same containers. Chapter 4. Great Ones, Cosmic Truths, and the Things You Cannot Understand. The Great Ones in Bloodborne are not gods in any traditional sense. They are not worshipped because they have power over the world. They are worshipped because the people who discovered them could not conceptualize a relationship with something that vast that did not involve worship. The church needed a framework, and religion was the framework it had. The Great Ones did not ask for temples. Humans built them because they did not know what else to do. Odin is the only Great One with a significant presence in the game who has no physical form. Every other Great One, every kin enemy type, every boss that falls into the cosmic category, has a body. Odin does not. The lore describes Odin as existing only in voice, only in sound, only in the space between words. There is a great one whose entire existence is vibration and resonance, and the game gives this entity worshippers a chapel and a profound impact on the plot without showing you anything to look at. The most important things in Bloodborne are often the ones you cannot see. The Odin Chapel is the safest space in the game. Survivors can be sent there. It is a place of temporary refuge in a city coming apart, and it is dedicated to a formless entity associated with violation and reproduction and the loss of self in something larger. The safest place in Yharnam is a temple to the most invasive Great One in the game. The irony is either deliberate or brilliant, or both. The messengers that appear throughout the game, the small grabbing hands from beneath the ground, the creatures that run the bath shops, the ones that deliver items, are never explained. Their relationship to the Great Ones, to the Dream, to the Hunters, is implied in fragments. One reading of the available lore suggests they are fragments of a Great One that shattered in contact with the human world, each piece retaining just enough intelligence to perform simple functions. If this is accurate, the economy of the Hunter's Dream is managed by pieces of a cosmic deity. The cord of the eye, the umbilical cords you collect to reach the true ending, are described as physical connections between a mother and a Great One child. 4 existed. The game describes how each one was obtained. All 4 of them were obtained through loss. A stillbirth. A murder. An experiment that ended in death. A sacrifice made in the ruins of a civilization. Every piece of the thing that grants you access to the truth of the game's world was created through a form of grief. The path to enlightenment in Bloodborne is paved with what it costs people to stand close to something divine. Murgo's wet nurse, the boss of the Nightmare of Mensis, guards the point where Murgo's crying is loudest. The wet nurse has no lore. She has no item description. She has no name beyond her function. She is the thing that cares for something that cannot be cared for. A nurse for something between life and death, attending to a need that cannot be resolved. She is the game's clearest image of futile devotion, and she fights with absolute commitment to a charge that cannot be saved. The Nightmare of Mensis is built from a city that no longer exists on the surface. Its architecture, its geography, its lighting all correspond to a historical period of Yharnam that predates what the player sees in the overworld. The nightmare was generated from the memory or the residue of a Yharnam that is gone, captured in the moment before or during a significant catastrophic event. The nightmare is not imaginary. It is archaeological. It is what was there, preserved past the point it should have disappeared. The giant brain suspended in the Nightmare of Mensis is connected to the Mensis ritual, a ceremony performed by the School of Mensis to contact a Great One. The brain is a human brain that was left in contact with the nightmare long enough to grow beyond human scale. The Mensis scholars put their brains in the nightmare and left them there. Most of them went insane. Their brains stayed behind and kept growing. The school tried to become large enough to hold a Great One's attention. They succeeded in the most catastrophic way possible. Mikolash, the host of the nightmare, is the only human boss in the game who retained enough of himself to be recognizable as a person. He quotes philosophy. He refers to himself. He has desires. He is also wearing a cage on his head and has been in a nightmare of his own construction long enough that he no longer experiences it as a nightmare. He experiences it as an achievement. He is the endpoint of the Mensis experiment, the human who wanted so badly to touch something cosmic that he dissolved the boundary between himself and the thing he wanted, and lost himself in the crossing. Mikolash's boss fight requires you to chase him through a maze while he teleports away and talks to you. He is not trying to defeat you. He is trying to continue the conversation he has been having with himself for however long he has been in there. He fights you when cornered, but his core behavior is retreat and monologue. He is telling you what he learnt, and you cannot kill him until he stops talking. In a game about the cost of knowledge, The keeper of the deepest knowledge dies mid-sentence. The amygdala that grabs you and teleports you to the lecture building is one of the most disorienting moments in the game on a first playthrough. The lecture building is a building from Byrgenwerth, suspended in the dream, populated by students who should be dead. The amygdala does not attack you. It picks you up and deposits you somewhere useful. Whether this is an act of assistance or simply a mechanical action with no intent behind it is one of the game's most debated questions. Something vast and alien picked you up and placed you where you needed to go. Why? The lecture building students have gone hollow in a specific way. They retain the shape of students, but their behaviour has simplified to aggression and nothing else. Their notebooks, visible on the desks in the lecture building, contain writing that has degraded into repetitive patterns of the same symbol. They were studying something, and the studying destroyed them. The final stage of their note-taking was writing the same thing over and over until it had no more meaning than a sound. Scholarship that has consumed itself entirely. The lecture building also contains diagrams pinned to boards that predate the events of the game by what the document styles suggest is several generations. Someone in the current crisis inherited a school that had been studying this problem for a very long time. The students who went hollow in the lecture building were not the first generation to try to understand what was happening to Yharnam. They were perhaps the last. The stars in Bloodborne's sky are consistent from area to area, with one major exception. In the Nightmare of Mensis, after Murgo's death, the stars rearrange. Every other time the sky changes in the game, it changes in lighting or colour. In the Mensis Nightmare, after the nurse is defeated and Murgo's crying stops, the star configuration itself changes. Stars move. This is not a day-night cycle. Stars moved because something that was holding them in a particular configuration ceased to hold them there. The Winter Lantern enemies in the Nightmare of Mensis cause frenzy build-up through their gaze. The gaze of something that has gotten too close to the cosmos is enough to make you go mad. The mechanic of looking at certain things causing harm is consistent across Bloodborne's entire insight system. The game punishes you for knowing things by making the things you know present in your world in hostile forms. Every piece of truth in Bloodborne carries a cost, and eventually the cost is your ability to function. The celestial mob enemies found in Yharnam during the Blood Moon phase have a unique property. They produce blue particles when they die that float upward and dissipate. Other enemies produce blood and physical debris. These produce light. The game gives them a different death, because they are different from everything else in the game. They are not dying in the way other things die. They are going somewhere else. Where they go is not addressed. Kos, whose body lies on the shore of the fishing hamlet, is the most physical Great One in the game. Every other Great One is either partially incorporeal, cosmic in scale, or otherwise abstracted. Kos is a body on a beach. She died, or something like death happened to her, and her body stayed there. The church found her, studied her, and took her child. The hamlet was destroyed to protect the secret of what the church did to a dead god. The entire DLC is the consequence of that decision. The orphan of Kos, when it first exits the body of Kos, holds a mass that it then transforms into a weapon. The mass is identified by the community as a placenta. The first thing the orphan does upon birth is pick up the physical remnant of its birth and make it a weapon. Everything about the orphan's existence was violence. The birth was violence. The weapon is the birth. The fight is the protest of something that should never have been in this situation, crying out in the only language available to it. The audio that plays when Kos's ghost appears at the end of the Delk is a reversed and slowed version of the orphan's cry. The mother's ghost speaks in her child's voice, played backward and slowed down. In a game full of careful audio design, this one is almost impossible to notice without audio tools. But once identified it changes the emotional register of the final scene entirely. She is not simply a ghost. She is speaking in the language of what was taken from her. The curse lifted at the end of the Del key, when Gehrman speaks and acknowledges what was done, is framed as closure, but the game does not show you what changes. You do not see the nightmare hunters freed. You do not see the fishing hamlet restored. The curse is lifted, and you return to wherever you are in the main game. The acknowledgement is the resolution. The saying of it is the thing. This is the closest Bloodborne comes to stating directly that what happened was wrong, and that acknowledgement, the naming of a crime, matters even when nothing material changes. The connection between the Delk and the main game's endings is indirect but structurally important. If the curse on the nightmare hunters was lifted, then the pool of hunters trapped in the nightmare, the ones that make up Gehrman's record, is finite. The dream has an endpoint. Whether the player reaches it before or after the DLC's events changes the meaning of what Gehrman is managing and what the moon presence is protecting. The Plain Doll's relationship to Maria is one of the game's most analysed connections. Maria's face, her posture, her attire in certain concept art all correspond closely to the doll's design. Gehrman made the doll to look like someone he lost. The Del key introduces Maria, and she is everything the doll suggests. A hunter of extraordinary skill and profound guilt who sealed herself away. Gehrman loved someone who destroyed herself over what she had done. He made a replica and lived with it in a dream. The sorrow behind the hunter's dream has a specific face and a specific name. The moon presence's physical design, visible clearly only in the true ending's boss fight, is bilaterally symmetrical in a way that no other great one in the game is. The symmetry is perfect, almost mechanical. The moon presence is the most organised looking thing in a game full of grotesque asymmetry. Whether this is meant to suggest that the moon presence is the most alien and therefore the most orderly, or the most artificial and therefore the most controlled, is not clear. Its perfection is its most disturbing quality. The transformation cutscene in the true ending shows an eye forming in the centre of your character's chest. The eye opens. The last thing the cutscene shows before the credits is that eye looking outward. You have become something that sees. Bloodborne began with a contract to find what you were looking for, and the game ends with you having become the thing that looks. You do not see the truth, you become the apparatus of seeing. The point of the journey was not what you found, it was what looking changed you into. The note left outside the gate to the forbidden woods that warns travellers away from entering was written by a hunter, not by the church. A hunter made a personal choice to warn other people based on what they saw. This is unremarkable. Hunters leave notes everywhere in the game. But this note, specifically, is one of the only first-person, non-church, non-scholar documents in the game that expresses genuine concern for the reader's well-being, without any institutional agenda behind it. A person warned you, not a system, not a church. A person who was scared wrote down what they were scared of and left it where someone might find it. The implication of the moon presence's relationship to Gehrman, that it trapped him in the dream or that he agreed to stay, or some combination of both, is deliberately ambiguous in the game's text. The only thing that is not ambiguous is that Gehrman wants to leave. His desire to grant you the mercy kill at the end of the game is partly about freeing you, and partly about freeing himself. He has been trying to end the dream long enough that he built a scythe and practiced with it and offers it as a gift. He did not become comfortable in his captivity. He built a tool for ending it and waited for someone capable enough to use it. The doll's relationship to Gehrman changes if you attack him before accepting his offer. She becomes hostile. It is the only time in the game she acts aggressively. She defends him. After everything, after whatever the relationship between them represents, she defends him. whether this is programmed loyalty or something that emerged from whatever it means to exist as something Gehrman made with grief and longing, is not answerable. She defends him. That is what she does. Every boss in Bloodborne has a name that relates to a concept or role. The cleric beast is a cleric who became a beast. The blood-starved beast starved for blood. The shadows of Yharnam are Yharnam's shadows. The dark beast Parl is a dark beast named Parl. The naming convention grounds even the most cosmic enemies in a relationship to something human. Even when you fight something vast and unknowable, it has a name that says what it used to be or what it means. The names are the last human frame around things that have moved beyond human frames. The dark beast Parl, accessible through Yharnam in the early game as an optional fight, is one of the fastest enemies in the game, despite being one of the largest. The size-to-speed relationship is wrong. It does not move like something that big should move. This is either a deliberate design choice to create a specific combat challenge, or a suggestion that whatever Parl is, it is not obeying the physical rules that apply to everything else. Things in Yharnam specifically seem to operate by different physics. The village of abductees, the chained giants, the dungeon beneath, the nightmare above. Yharnam is a place where the normal rules have been negotiated away. The Cainhurst Vilebloods represent the alternative path, the bloodline that used the old blood differently than the church did. Their castle is preserved, inaccessible through normal travel, reachable only by carriage, which means whatever happened to Cainhurst happened to the roads first. The connection between Cainhurst and the surface world was severed before the castle itself fell. They were isolated and then destroyed. Whether the church engineered this isolation before sending Logarius to seal them is one of the game's structural open questions. Alfred's assassination of the Vileblood Queen, if you give him the unopened summons, is framed as righteous in Alfred's internal logic, but presented by the game in a way that is clearly horrific. He tears her apart. He laughs. He prays. He thanks you. And then later you find him broken, his mission complete, his purpose gone, crouched at the foot of the cathedral. Purpose built entirely around destruction cannot survive its own success. Alfred finishes what he started, and it destroys him more completely than any enemy could have. The Vileblood Queen Annalise, if you have the Cainhurst badge and attend to her before Alfred's mission, sits on a throne and speaks to you. She is not evil in her dialogue. She is bored. She has been on that throne for what the lore suggests is a very long time, unable to truly die because of the old blood in her, watching everyone who came to her eventually leave or be sent against her. She is immortal in a ruined castle, and her primary emotion in the available dialogue is something close to indifference. Annalise is what happens when you live long enough to stop expecting things to change. The detail that completes the picture of Bloodborne's design philosophy is this. Every single lore element in the game, from the deepest dungeon inscription to the most throwaway item description to the ambient audio in a boss arena, was considered. Nothing was left unexamined. From Software built a world with a logic that holds at every scale, from the cosmic to the personal, and they buried most of it where only the most patient and attentive players would find it. The game rewards you for paying attention the way the lore rewards the characters who paid attention, with more to look at, deeper and stranger, and more beautiful and more terrible the further down you go. 517 details. And there are more. Chapter 5. Weapons, Tools, and the Language of Violence. The trick weapons of Bloodborne are the most mechanically distinctive feature of the game, and also the most lore-dense. Every weapon in the game transforms. The transformation is not just a gameplay mechanic. It is a statement about what the weapon is for and who made it and under what circumstances. The saw cleaver, in its compact form, is a tool. Extended, it is an execution device. The same object, two different relationships with the thing it is meant to do. This is how the game thinks about violence. Nothing in Yharnam does only one thing. The Hunter Axe, the most basic strength weapon in the game, extends into a form that is explicitly used for crowd control. Its moveset, when extended, is designed to deal with multiple enemies at once. The design history embedded in the weapon is the history of the hunt before the player arrived. Whoever made the Hunter Axe anticipated mobs. They built a tool for fighting groups of people who had already turned. The weapon precedes the situation it was made for. The threaded cane is the only starting weapon that is also a social object. In its cane form, it is something a person of status carries in public. In its whip form, it becomes something else entirely. The threaded cane is a weapon that was designed to be hidden as a social accessory, which tells you something about the class of hunters who used it and the world they moved through. They were hunters who attended parties. They needed to be armed without appearing armed. The Kirkhammer, which pairs a small silver hammer with a massive stone greatsword, has a transformation that makes no physical sense if you think about it for more than a moment. The small hammer is a handle. The stone blade is stored nowhere visible. The weapon operates on the game's logic, rather than physical logic, which is a choice the developers made consistently for some weapons and inconsistently for others. The Kirkhammer's impossible transformation is itself a quality of the church that made it. The church built things that operated on internal logic rather than external reality. The Ludwig's Holy Blade, considered by much of the community to be the most complete weapon in the game in terms of design and lore weight, has a transformation that reveals a second weapon hidden inside the first. The straight sword is already inside the greatsword before you extend it. The truth was always there. You just needed to know how to look. The Holy Blade is a metaphor for the entire game's approach to lore delivery, pretending to be a sword. The Burial Blade, Gehrman's weapon, cannot be acquired until New Game Plus, until you have already finished the game at least once. You can only pick up the scythe of the person who tried to free you after you have completed the journey he was guiding you through. The Burial Blade is a reward for the second pass, the wiser playthrough, the one where you already know what everything costs. Gehrman's tool only becomes available when you have earned the context for it. The Chikage, the vile blood weapon, drains your own health when in its transformed state. Every moment you spend using the most powerful version of the Cainhurst weapon is a moment you are spending your own life to do it. The vile blood philosophy in weapon form. Power from the blood. The blood is yours. This costs you something. The cost is the point. The Rakio, the weapon associated with Lady Maria in the Delk, is a paired weapon that requires you to split one blade into two. It is found in the fishing hamlet in an extremely hostile and difficult to reach location. Getting Maria's weapon requires going through the worst of what she participated in covering up. The geography of the weapon's location is the game's judgment about what Maria's elegance and skill were in service of. The amygdalan arm is exactly what the name suggests. It is a limb taken from an amygdala. You use a piece of a great one as a weapon. The fact that this is possible and not immediately fatal to the wielder suggests something about the nature of physical contact with Great One material. It does not corrupt you in the way the blood does. It just hurts other things very effectively. The game makes a distinction between touching something cosmic and ingesting it. Touching it makes you dangerous. Ingesting it changes you. The bloodletter, the powder keg weapon found in the Nightmare, requires you to drive the weapon into your own body to transform it. The moveset in transformed mode is built around the weapon emerging from your body and being used to attack. The powder kegs built a weapon that requires you to wound yourself to operate it fully. Their philosophy of using everything available, including your own blood and pain, is embedded in the weapon's mechanics. The parasite found in the fishing hamlet requires you to wear a specific attire to use it effectively. You have to dress a certain way to use the weapon properly. The item and the clothing are connected. The weapon has a dress code. This is either a mechanical curiosity or a statement that the thing the weapon is made from had preferences about how it was worn. The cost parasite specifically scales with the arcane stat and is associated with the thing that was taken from costs. Using it optimally means becoming something that channels the power of what the church stole. The player becomes an instrument of what was violated. The weapon turns the history of the fishing hamlet into a damage calculation. The Simon's Bowblade, the weapon belonging to Simon the Harrowed in the Dielk, is a bow that transforms into a sword. Simon is the character most explicitly concerned with finding the truth of what happened in the hamlet. His weapon is designed to work at range first, to observe from a distance, and only become a close-range tool when necessary. His character as a seeker of truth from a safe distance is embedded in his weapon's design. The whirligig saw, called the pizza cutter by the community, is the most deliberately absurd-looking weapon in the game, and also has one of the most specific lore origins. It was made by the powder keg specifically to maximize the trauma done to beast bodies. The powder kegs were not subtle. They were not elegant. They built a circular saw on a stick and used it, and it worked. Their philosophy was effectiveness over appearance, which is why the church erased them. Effective, but ugly, is a threat to an institution that required beautiful aesthetics to maintain authority. The Gatling gun is the only weapon in the game that is explicitly too heavy and too loud to use without attracting attention. The item description notes this. It is a weapon for when subtlety has been abandoned entirely, when the hunt has gone so far past any pretense of method that you are just pointing a machine gun at things. The player who equips the Gatling gun has moved past the fiction of the hunter as a skilled practitioner. They are just destroying things now. The flame sprayer weapons in the game have an interesting property in that fire is one of the few tools that works effectively on beasts throughout the entire game. Fire is reliable. Fire was used to burn old Yharnam. The same tool used to cleanse a city is available to individual hunters in portable form. The scale changes. The function is identical. The church pick, a weapon that converts between a pick and a transformed form useful for thrust attacks, was made by the Healing Church's hunters specifically. Its design philosophy differs from the Hunter Workshop weapons in that it prioritizes a specific range of attack rather than versatility. The Church's hunters were trained differently. They were not generalists. They were trained for specific situations the Church anticipated and prepared for. The weapon tells you the Church had a doctrine of violence, not just a practice of it. The Blade of Mercy, two very small blades that deal rapid hits and apply a bleed effect, is the weapon most associated with the Canehurst Vilebloods in the Hunter's Nightmare. Multiple Vileblood hunters wield them there. The Vilebloods used quick, bleeding attacks that drained life. In a culture built around the value and power of blood, a weapon that causes uncontrolled bleeding is a profound statement about their philosophy. They made the thing that everyone else feared into a tool. The hunter tools, the throwable items and spells derived from arcane power, represent the Healing Church's attempt to weaponize the knowledge they gained from contact with the Great Ones. The Augur of Ebrietas, which calls a tentacle through a dimensional rift, is literally using a piece of Ebrietas as a weapon. The Church figured out how to make the Great One's physical reality into ammunition. The tools represent the complete perversion of what began as research into wonder. We found something vast and beautiful, and we figured out how to shoot it at people. The empty phantasm shell, which coats a weapon in arcane energy derived from a phantom, is one of the few hunter tools that does not have a specific Great One origin. The phantom it draws from is not identified. Something hollow and undefined lends power to the weapon. The unnamed source is more unsettling than any of the named origins. At least when you know what you are using, you can locate your conscience relative to it. Pebbles, the most basic throwable item in the game, deserve specific mention because they are never explained. You pick up rocks and throw them to distract enemies. This is a practical hunting technique. It is also the single most grounded, most human action available to the player in a game full of trick weapons and arcane blasts. When the world is completely beyond human comprehension, you can always throw a rock at it. The monocular item in Bloodborne has no combat use. It is for looking at things from a distance. In a game entirely about the cost of seeing things you should not see, an item that exists purely to see further is either a curiosity or the most dangerous item in the game, depending on what you point it at. The empty phantasm shell's animation shows the hunter breathing on the weapon before using it. The breath is the activation. This small gesture, a human breath used to trigger something cosmic, is one of the images that captures Bloodborne's central tension most precisely. The human is still in the loop. The human is what makes it work. The Great One material needs a person to breathe on it to become a weapon. Blood vials, the primary healing item, are collected from enemies. You heal yourself with the blood of things you kill. Your health and their death are the same resource. The restorative and the destructive flow from the same source. Every time you survive a fight by using the blood you collected from the previous fight, you are demonstrating in mechanical terms what the entire game is saying thematically. The system that heals you is the system that creates the problem. Quicksilver bullets made from the hunter's own blood, already mentioned in the original compilation, deserve extension here. The maximum bullet count is capped. You have a limit on how much of yourself you can spend in any given engagement. The cap is not about ammunition management in any conventional game sense. It is about how much of yourself you can give in any given moment before you need to stop. The game mechanically prevents you from spending yourself completely in a single fight. Someone designed that limit. Someone thought that was important. The cannon, the heaviest firearm in the game, costs 5 quicksilver bullets per shot, 5 times as much of yourself per trigger pull. The weapon that does the most damage at range costs the most of you to operate. The scale between damage output and self-cost is consistent throughout the game. The more devastating the tool, the more it requires from your body to use. The Rosmarinus, a weapon that sprays holy water, is used by healing church hunters in certain areas. Holy water being deployed as a weapon against things that were human by people who represent an institution of healing. The Rosmarinus is the healing church's relationship to its own patients in item form. We will spray this at you for your own good. The tiny music box, which is not a weapon but is used offensively against Father Gascoigne, is the most personal object in the game. It was given to you by a child to help you stop her father from hurting you. The game requires you to make a mechanical choice to use a little girl's music box as a tool for weakening a man who is being consumed by something he cannot control. The ethics of using it are not addressed by the game. You use it because you need to survive. What that costs the person who gave it to you is not calculated. The pungent blood cocktail exists to distract enemies using the smell of blood. In a city overrun by things responding to blood on an instinctual level, the hunter learned to use the attraction to blood as a control mechanism. The hunters adapted to their environment. They learned what the beasts wanted, and they used that want against them. This is either resourceful or the most disturbing coping mechanism in the game. The old hunter's bone, found in the hunter's nightmare, is the remnant of a hunter who developed a technique for moving so fast they could step through time. The bone retains the technique. You use a dead hunter's bone to move through time in brief intervals. The old hunter's DLC is full of the residue of techniques left behind by people who are gone, waiting to be picked up and used again by whoever comes next. Knowledge outlasts the body. The technique survives the hunter. The clockwise metamorphosis rune, which increases maximum health, has an image that resembles a snail shell or a cochlea. The rune that makes you more durable against the world's violence is shaped like an ear. Whether you survive the sounds of Bloodborne's world or the world itself depends on how you are shaped. The anti-clockwise metamorphosis rune increases stamina, the resource for action. The rune for doing more things is the same spiral in the opposite direction. The rune system in Bloodborne presents reality as a set of shapes, directions, and orientations. The difference between endurance and action is the direction you are winding. Everything is the same thing moving differently. The lake rune, which reduces damage from lightning-type attacks, has no lore explanation for its name. Lakes appear in the game in specific significant locations. Byrgenwerth's Lake, the lake where Rom sits. Water features in Bloodborne are always sites of something cosmic happening, or having happened. A rune named after a lake that protects you from a type of energy associated with the sky and the Great Ones suggests that lakes are shields. The water protects against the thing above it. Chapter 6. NPCs, Survivors, and the Cost of Being Sane. The NPC survivors in Bloodborne are not there to be saved. The game presents their survival as a secondary outcome at best and a cruelty at worst. Every NPC you can shepherd to the Odin Chapel ends up worse off than they were when you found them. The game does not reward the instinct to protect people. It examines the instinct. It asks what protection means in a world where every safe space is temporary and every sanctuary is built on a lie. The first survivor you encounter, the young woman near the central Yharnam lamp, can be sent to the Odin Chapel or Iosefka's clinic. Sending her to the chapel means she eventually goes mad. Sending her to the clinic means she is experimented on and transformed. The player's two options are versions of the same outcome expressed through different agencies. You did not choose between good and bad. You chose between two kinds of bad, and only one of them involved your hands. Iosefka, the doctor whose clinic you start in, has a voice that changes over the course of the game. If you contact her through the door early in the game, she sounds like a person, scared but functional, trying to help within limits. Later, the voice that speaks through the door is different. Not dramatically, not obviously on a first playthrough. But the inflection changes. The way she spaces her words changes. Something replaced her and took most of her language patterns, but not all of them. The impersonation is almost perfect. Almost is the important word. The NPC that replaced Iosefka is doing something to the people you send there. The transformed figures found inside the clinic, when you access it through the back entrance, are the people you thought you were helping. The game allows you to send NPCs to Iosefka's clinic across the entire mid-game and only reveals what was happening to them when you see the results. The revelation is retroactive. The harm was always happening. You just could not see it yet. Gilbert, the man behind the window near the central Yharnam lamp, is never seen. He is only a voice. He speaks to you as a hunter to a hunter, sharing what he knows, expressing what he feels. He tells you about the cleric beast. He gives you the flame sprayer. He speaks with a warmth and a genuine quality that is extremely rare in the game's NPC interactions. And then over the course of the game his voice changes, and by the time you return at a certain point in the story, he is no longer a man behind a window. He is a beast behind a window. The voice that was warmest in the game belongs to the character whose transformation you witness most gradually. Gilbert became what everything in Yharnam eventually became, and the game made you care about him first, so that the shift would register not as a gameplay event, but as a loss. The retired hunter at the Odin Chapel, Henrik, is Father Gascoigne's partner. After Gascoigne's death, Henrik turns hostile in a questline connected to Eileen the Crow. The partnership broke when Gascoigne fell. Henrik, who survived, could not function in the wake of it. The hunt, the thing that gave them both purpose, consumed one of them, and the other could not continue without the one it consumed. He attacks you not from malice, but from a place that cannot be named cleanly. He was a hunter who lost the thing he was hunting alongside. Eileen the Crow, the hunter of hunters, is one of the most quietly heroic characters in the game, even though her function is killing other hunters who have gone mad. She does not enjoy it. The dialogue makes this clear. She does it because someone has to, and she has accepted that it is her. The distinction between Eileen and every other hunter in the game is that she does something awful for reasons she is at peace with. She is not lying to herself about what she does. In Bloodborne, the ability to look clearly at the thing you are doing is a form of grace. Eileen can die if you fail to progress her questline correctly, and if she does, she is found at the Grand Cathedral in a state that is both gruesome and, if you read her note, dignified. She knew what she was doing, and she continued anyway. The note she leaves is not a testament of heroism. It is a handoff. Someone needs to continue the work. The note is addressed to you. The inheritance of an awful necessary duty is one of Bloodborne's ways of defining what a hunter is. The doll speaks to you every time you level up. She is part of every experience point transaction in the game. Every time you become stronger, you do it with her present, with her words in your ear. She says something warm and slightly sad every time. She thanks you for coming back. She notes that it pleases her to see you. These small social rituals happen hundreds of times across a full playthrough, and most players stop hearing them. But they are always there. The doll is always there. She made a commitment to be present for something, and she is honouring it in the only way she knows how, which is to keep saying the same careful things every single time. The doll's statement that she feels something when you are near, without understanding what that feeling is one of the cleanest articulations of the game's existential register. She was made to be present with a grieving old man in a nightmare. She was not made to understand what presence means. She just does it. She feels something she has no language for, and she continues to show up. This is either a touching character detail or a horror, depending on how you think about what it means to have feelings you cannot name. The little girl in central Yharnam, Gascoigne's youngest daughter, is the character whose questline ends most cruelly if you complete it by the book. She asks you to find her mother. She gives you the music box. If you tell her what happened to both of her parents and return to where she was, she is gone. If you give her the red jeweled brooch, which she identifies as her mother's, she falls to despair, and by the time you return to that location, she, too, is gone. She became what her parents became. The girl who gave you the key to defeating her father was destroyed by the knowledge of his defeat. Completing the questline correctly is the worst possible outcome, and the game never tells you this in advance. Gascoigne's older daughter, if you find her, provides a different kind of terrible. She has processed the events of the night in the only way available to her, by partially dissociating from them. She asks about her family with a calm that is not peace. It is the calm of someone who already knows and cannot afford to fully feel it yet. The older sister got there first. She is holding it together through willpower, and the game leaves her holding it. The skeptical man at the Odin Chapel is never named. He doubts everything you tell him. He questions the value of the refuge he is in. He resists the comfort being offered to him and to the other survivors. He is the least sympathetic of the chapel survivors on first encounter. He is also the most clear-eyed. He knows the chapel is not safe. He knows that nowhere is safe. He knows this and says so, and everyone around him finds it unhelpful. He survives to the end of the game in a version of surviving, and his skepticism is the thing that kept him most intact. Doubt, in Bloodborne, is a form of protection. The suspicious beggar found in the Forbidden Woods is one of the most discussed NPCs in the game, because he kills the other survivors if sent to the chapel. He is a beast who has retained the capacity for speech and deception, which raises the question of whether the beasts who have lost speech were ever in a different state, or whether the beggar is exceptional. He maintained enough human function to lie. The lie is perfect, and it works, because the player has no way to know in advance. He kills people you work to save, and he does it off-screen, and by the time you know, it is too late. The Forbidden Woods harbours something that turns the entire survivor rescue project against itself. The madman Waller, found behind an illusory wall in Yharnam, has been there long enough that his dialogue is fragmented. He does not give you full sentences. He gives you pieces of thoughts. The time in Yharnam, the presence of whatever that place does to people, has broken his ability to complete an idea. He can still speak, he just cannot finish. Yharnam produces this specific damage. People who have been there too long retain the beginning of thoughts and lose the endings. The male and female students found at Bergenworth are not there in a protective capacity. They are not survivors sheltering from the hunt. They are there because they went to Bergenworth to study, and something changed and they cannot leave. Bergenworth produces people who cannot leave. The scholars went there looking for something, and what they found made leaving impossible. The students in the building are the residue of an institution that consumed everyone who tried to seriously engage with what it was learning. The Plain Dolls creator, Yharnam, built his only companion to look like someone else. The people who endure long isolation in Bloodborne do not emerge with wisdom and solitude as virtues. They emerge with replicas of the things they lost. Yharnam built the doll. The school of Mensis built a nightmare out of the memory of a city. The beasts in Old Yharnam wear the clothes of a different era. Long duration in one place makes people hold tighter to the things they cannot keep. Master Willem at Bergenworth is alive but immobile, sitting in his chair overlooking the lake where Rom sits, watching. He is the founder of the institution that began the inquiry that led to everything. He is at the top of his building, looking at the consequence of what he started, and he cannot or will not move from that position. He has been watching Rom for what appears to be a very long time. The man who started it all is sitting at the edge of his origin point, unable to look away from where it went. Willem's dialogue, if you can get him to speak, is fragmented and strange. He says things that suggest he knew what was coming and was not able to stop it. He gave the eyes to the head, but it was too many eyes. Too much sight at once. The wisdom that was supposed to protect Bergenworth became the mechanism of its destruction, because it was applied faster than anyone could process what they were seeing. Willem sits looking at what seeing too much produced, and he is still there when the blood moon rises, and he is still there after it, and whatever he is waiting for, it is not salvation. Simon the Harrowed, the DLC character most focused on uncovering the truth of the Fishing Hamlet massacre, has a moment in his questline where he gives you a key piece of information and then immediately apologizes for knowing it. He understands things that hurt to understand. The knowledge of the massacre is not power for him. It is weight. He has been carrying it, and when he passes it to you, he is passing the weight, not relieving his own. He is not sharing information, he is sharing a burden. The gesture is generous and exhausting, and the game renders it exactly as such. Brador, the church assassin found in the fishing hamlet, sends invaders after you throughout the DLC. He invades your world to protect the church's secret. He is an extension of the institutional will to keep the hamlet buried. You can kill him in his cell, which is found in a location so specific that most players never discover it without guidance. The institutional enforcer of a crime is sitting in a cell in the place where the crime happened. Whether the cell is his punishment or his post is not clear. He guards the secret from inside the place he is guarding. Brador's gear, obtainable by killing him in his cell, includes a note that reveals he knew the full scope of what happened in the hamlet. He did not just follow orders, he understood what the orders were for, and he carried them out anyway. The distinction between following orders and understanding them is the distinction the game draws most precisely in Brador's case. He was not ignorant, he was complicit. The church found someone who would be complicit and put him in the hamlet where his complicity would be most useful. The abandoned old workshop contains a plain doll figure, smaller and cruder than the one in the hunter's dream, sitting in the same chair. The original. Before whatever Gehrman did to refine her, there was this one. The first attempt at comfort. The practice version of the thing he needed. The old workshop holds the rougher, earlier version of everything that appears polished in the dream. The dream is the refined version of something that started here and had all its edges smoothed by repetition and grief and the specific kind of love that does not know how to stop. Chapter 7. Architecture, Geography, and the Map as Argument. Yharnam is a city designed to be read. The streets do not just connect locations, they make arguments. The Grand Cathedral is always visible from below. You can see it from almost anywhere in the lower districts. This is not accidental. The church built at the highest point, and built big enough that its presence was inescapable from anywhere in the city. The architecture enforces hierarchy before a single word of doctrine is spoken. The lower districts of Yharnam, the canal area, the lower parts of central Yharnam, the areas near the water, are physically denser and more decayed than the cathedral ward. The inequality of maintenance and quality is built into the geography. The closer you are to the church, the better maintained your environment. This is not subtle, but it is consistent, and the game uses environmental detail to make a political point that no character ever states directly. The shortcuts in Yharnam are all doors and gates that you open from one side. You always open the shortcut from the far side, pulling the gate toward you, unlocking something that was locked against your progress. The shortcut system in Bloodborne is built on the idea that the barriers to movement in this world were placed by someone against someone. Every shortcut is an act of overcoming a lock that should not have been there. The rooftops of central Yharnam are traversable and contain loot, enemies, and environmental storytelling that the street level does not. People lived and worked and suffered on these roofs. The vertical dimension of Yharnam is as inhabited as the horizontal one, and the things that happened on rooftops, visible only from above, are part of the city's history that you can only access by leaving the ground. The city rewards height. Hemwick Charnel Lane connects to the Cathedral Ward through a gate that is not normally noticed on first playthrough, because most players discover it by accident. The Charnel Lane is not on the obvious path. Hemwick is where the city buries its dead, and the path to it is a side passage that you find by wandering rather than following the main road. The city hid its cemetery around a corner. The management of death in Yharnam was never meant to be the primary route. The Forbidden Woods' layout, described earlier as deliberately disorienting, has an additional quality that emerges only when viewed on a map overlay. The path through the woods traces a rough spiral moving inward toward Byggenworth. The disorientation is structural. You are always moving in, and the in is always the same regardless of which apparent direction you travel. The woods are a convergent geometry. Whatever you try to do in them, you end up closer to the centre. The lake at Byggenworth is not accessible except through the area that leads to Rom's fight. There is no path along the shore. The water can be seen from above, from the building, but reaching it requires going through the institution that studied it. You cannot approach the lake directly. You have to go through Byggenworth first. The institution mediates your access to the thing it was studying. This is true of the Healing Church and the Great Ones, and it is true of Byggenworth and the lake. The pattern of institutions controlling access to the things they claim to understand runs through the entire game's geography. The Nightmare Frontier, an area accessed through a amygdala in Yhargul, is the only area in the game that has a toxic swamp with no narrative explanation for its presence. The swamp is simply there. In an area otherwise defined by nightmare logic and alien architecture, there is a bog. The bog damages you and slows your movement and is full of enemies. It is the most annoying area in the game to most players. It is also the least explained. The nightmare chose to include a bog. The nightmare's logic is not always legible. The lecture building, suspended in the dream, accessed via amygdala transport, occupies a space that should not exist geographically. It is inside neither the dream nor Yharnam proper. It is between them. The lecture building is the space between the world and the dream, which is exactly what Byrgenwerth itself tried to be. The institution that tried to position itself at the boundary between the human and the cosmic ended up suspended at exactly that boundary, forever, with its students inside it, going mad in the space between. Cainhurst Castle is reached by carriage, and the carriage arrives on a platform that is otherwise inaccessible. You cannot reach the castle platform except by the carriage. You cannot leave the platform except by the carriage. The carriage is the only connection between Cainhurst and the rest of the world, and it does not run unless summoned by a specific item. The isolation of Cainhurst is total and designed. The castle exists in a pocket of geography that cannot be reached except through the specific mechanism that the castle's survivors provided to invite you. The snow at Cainhurst is one of only 2 weather conditions in the game, the other being rain in certain areas. The snow at Cainhurst is permanent. It is not a weather event. It is the state of the place. Cainhurst is in permanent winter. The season stopped when whatever happened to Cainhurst happened. The castle is not experiencing winter, it is preserved in it. The seasonal stasis matches the social and biological stasis of the Vilebloods, immortal on their frozen hill, waiting in a cold that never ends. The blood-red leaves in certain Cainhurst areas are visible against the snow in a way that calls attention to the colour contrast. Red on white in a game about blood is not an accident. The castle grounds are blood-stained in the most aesthetically rendered way possible. The beauty of Cainhurst, and it is undeniably the most visually striking location in the game, is inseparable from its violence. The leaves are beautiful, and they are the colour of blood, and the snow is beautiful, and it never ends, and the queen inside is beautiful, and she will outlive everyone. Yharnam, the unseen village, has a name that refers to invisibility or hiddenness. The village was always hidden. The healing church did its most secretive work there. The abductions, the experiments, the rituals. The thing the village is named for is what the church used it for. And the amygdalae that are invisible at low insight are most dense in Yharnam. The hidden village is more hidden than anywhere else in the city. Hiddenness compounds in this location. Things are here that you cannot see, and the things you can see are hiding things. The Hunter's Nightmare is, spatially, a flipped version of the beginning of the game. The structures are familiar from early Yharnam, but their orientation and accessibility are wrong. You can access areas in the Nightmare that were inaccessible in the real world. The walls you could not pass in Yharnam proper are passable in the Nightmare. The Nightmare offers access that reality withheld. What you could not find in the waking world is available in the place where hunters who could not stop hunting ended up. The Nightmare gave them what they were looking for and trapped them with it. The fishing hamlet is the furthest point from the beginning of the game, not just in terms of playthrough progression, but in terms of the game's chronology. It is the point where the game's history originates, and the point where the player's journey ends. The Delk moves you backward in time to the earliest event in the game's causal history, and puts you at the shore of the ocean where it all began. The structure of the Delk is a descent into the past, and the hamlet is the bottom of the past. The ocean visible from the fishing hamlet, which should be impossible given the landlocked geography of the rest of the game, is another example of Bloodborne's water operating on symbolic rather than geographic logic. The ocean is where great ones come from, or where they end up, or where the boundary between what can and cannot exist is most permeable. The ocean is present in the hamlet, because it has to be. The hamlet is the place where the human world met the cosmic world and could not survive the meeting, and the ocean is the meeting point. The cliffs of the fishing hamlet drop straight to the water. There is no beach except the one where Kos's body lies. The entire coastline is hostile in every direction except that one shore. The only approachable point of the ocean in the whole game is the place where a great one's body washed up and was found by the church. The geography funnels you to the exact spot where the harm began. The interior of the research hall, above Maria's clock tower, has windows that look out at a sky that is different from the sky visible outside the building when you approach it. The sky from inside the hall is closer to the sky of the nightmare. The building is already partially displaced from the normal world. The experiments inside move the hall partway out of regular reality, and the windows are the evidence. What you see from inside is not what you see from outside. The building and the world no longer agree about what the sky looks like. The astral clock tower, Maria's domain, has a clock mechanism that does not appear to track any time system visible elsewhere in the game. The clock face is divided in a way that does not correspond to hours or lunar phases or any identifiable system. The clock measures something specific to that location. Whatever time means in the clock tower, it is not the same as what time means anywhere else. The game has a location where the measurement of time is private, personal to the space, disconnected from every external frame of reference. In a DLC full of secrets, a clock that tells its own time is among the most quietly disturbing. The path from the hunter's nightmare to the fishing hamlet requires passing through Ludwig's arena, through the research hall, through Maria's clock tower, and then down into the hamlet. You move from the first hunter to the church's experimental subjects, to the hunter who covered up the church's worst crime, to the site of the crime itself. The DLC is a guided tour of causality. Ludwig's corruption enabled the church's growth. The church's growth funded the research hall. The research hall's existence justified the fishing hamlet. The hamlet produced Kos's death. Each location causes the next. The path through the DLC is the path through a chain of consequences. The lumen flower gardens in the research hall are plants that grow toward a light that is not visible within the building. The flowers are oriented towards something outside the building, and above it, something the walls of the hall conceal. The garden grows toward a source that you cannot see from inside. The patients, transformed into antenna-like shapes, are also reaching upward. Everything in the research hall is trying to get out of the building towards something above it. The building is a container for things that have outgrown it, and the outgrowing is what destroyed them. Chapter 8. Audio Design and the Sounds of a World Coming Apart. The ambient sound design in Bloodborne is doing as much work as any visual element, and it is doing it in a register that bypasses conscious analysis. You feel Bloodborne's audio before you understand it. The low rumble beneath almost every area of Yharnam is not environmental sound in the conventional sense. It is a sustained sub-bass frequency that the human body responds to physiologically before the ear processes it as sound. You feel Yharnam in your chest before you hear it. The footstep sounds in Bloodborne change based on surface material with a specificity that goes beyond standard game audio design. The difference between cobblestone and wooden floor and blood-wet stone and dry earth is rendered distinctly. The game wants you to hear where you are. The audio tells you the surface before you look at it. In an area full of visual horror, your feet tell you the truth. The silence in certain areas of the game is itself a piece of design. The abandoned old workshop has almost no ambient sound. The quiet is sudden if you come to it from Cathedral Ward, which has a low continuous audio bed. The silence in the workshop is the sound of something that has been closed and emptied. The silence is the absence of the thing that used to be there. Gehrman left this place and took the sound of occupation with him. The music for the Cleric Beast boss fight is one of the most analysed pieces of music in the game's soundtrack. It begins with strings and escalates through brass into something overwhelming, and underneath all of it, in the lowest register, there is a choir that most speakers do not reproduce clearly. The choir is singing something. What they are singing has been transcribed by audio community members who isolated the track. The choir is singing a version of the Hunter's Dream music. The first boss fight in the game has the music of the ending hidden in its audio foundation. Father Gascoigne's fight music, when he transforms into a beast, undergoes a change that most players register as purely emotional, but that is technically specific. The key of the music shifts by a half step downward. In music theory, this is called modulating flat. It produces a flatter, darker tonal centre. The music goes down when Gascoigne goes down. The composition is tracking his descent in terms of pitch. The doll's humming, which can be heard if you stand near her without interacting, matches the melody of the music box that Gascoigne's daughter gives you. The doll hums the lullaby of a dead woman whose husband is one of the first bosses in the game. Whether the doll learnt this melody from Yharnam, who may have known Gascoigne, or whether the melody predates all of them and the doll simply hums what the dream provides, is not established. But the melody is the same. The doll hums dead women's songs to herself in the garden of the Hunter's Dream. The sound that plays when you level up at the doll is a rising tone sequence that corresponds to a musical interval called a major sixth. In Western music theory, the major sixth is associated with warmth, with optimism, with opening. Every time you get stronger in Bloodborne, the game plays you a sound associated with opening. You are becoming more of what you need to be for something to open. The game tells you this every time you level up, and you hear it as a pleasant level-up sound, and it is also a statement about what growth means in this world. The bell-ringing woman's bell in Yharnam has a specific resonant frequency that, in the in-game audio analysis done by community members, matches the frequency of the ambient drone of the nightmare sequences. The bell is ringing at the frequency of the nightmare. The women ringing it are not just calling enemies. They are resonating with the nightmare itself. They are part of the same acoustic system as the nightmare they are helping sustain. The ocean in the fishing hamlet can be heard throughout the DLC in a way that underwater sound behaves differently from how surface sound does. The ocean sound in the hamlet has a pressure quality, a muffled deep resonance, as though you are already underwater or as though the water is already in your ears. The hamlet is not near the ocean. It is in the ocean, in some meaningful sense. The sound knows this, even if the geography tries to present it otherwise. Murgo's cry in the Nightmare of Mensis is specifically designed to sound like it comes from no fixed direction. Normal game audio position sounds spatially. You can tell where an enemy is by the direction of its sound. Murgo's cry comes from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The spatial audio design refuses to locate the cry. The child is everywhere in the nightmare. The grief is not located. Because grief is not located, it fills the space. The sound of blood dripping is present in more areas of the game than players consciously register. It is particularly dense in areas connected to healing church activity, the research hall, Yharnam, the interior of the Grand Cathedral. The blood is always running somewhere. The sound of the city's central metaphor is always audible if you slow down enough to listen. Most players stop hearing the dripping because it is constant. The thing you stop hearing is still happening. Ludwig's audio design during his second phase, when he turns toward the light and begins to speak, includes an acoustic effect that makes his voice sound like it is coming from further away than his physical position in the arena. The voice is at the wrong distance. The man speaking to you is not quite in the same space as the body you are fighting. Part of him has already gone somewhere else. The audio renders his partial departure from reality. The music of the Hunter's Dream shifts tempo across the game's progression. It is not dramatic. Most players would not identify it consciously. But the theme that plays in the early game Dream plays measurably faster than the version that plays after the blood moon rises. The world got heavier, and the music slowed under the weight. The tempo is tracking something. The final cutscene audio in each ending has a specific quality of silence at its conclusion. Not the end of the music. Not a fade. Each ending concludes with a moment of complete audio null before the credits begin. In an industry where most games end with swelling music and immediate credits, Bloodborne ends each of its conclusions with a beat of nothing. The silence is the game making room for what you just experienced to exist without being immediately covered by something else. Chapter 9. Item Descriptions and the Art of the Buried Sentence. The item description system in Bloodborne is the primary lore delivery mechanism, and it operates on a principle of incompleteness. Every description tells you part of what you need to know. The rest is inference, cross-reference, and the willingness to sit with information that is not shaped into a complete story. The game treats the player as capable of doing interpretive work and declines to do the work for you. This is either deeply respectful of the audience or a challenge to see who is paying attention. It is probably both. The pebble item description reads simply that it is a smooth, round stone. It says nothing else. In a game where item descriptions carry enormous lore weight, the pebble's description is a refusal to participate in the project of meaning. A stone is a stone. Sometimes a rock is a rock. The pebble description is a breathing exercise in the middle of a game that otherwise never lets you breathe. The madman's knowledge, which looks like a human brain and is consumed to gain insight, has a description that notes it is the skull of a madman, with something still inside. The skull is already there in the description before you look at the item model and register that yes, you are eating a brain from a skull. The description is ahead of the disgust. It tells you what you are holding before you have processed what you are holding. The item description and the item model collaborate to produce a response that neither could produce alone. The blood gem system, which allows modification of weapons, has individual gem descriptions that contain lore about their origin. Cursed gems mention the circumstances under which curses are applied to gems. Radiant gems mention the properties of things that grow toward the light. Waning gems reference a specific stage in an unnamed cycle. The gem categories are named after phases and states and directions, and the descriptions fill in what those categories mean without ever providing a unified explanation of the system. You piece the gem cosmology together from dozens of small descriptions across the entire game. The Carol rune system is described in the note from Carol, a Bergenworth student who developed a way of transcribing the sounds made by Great Ones. The runes are not symbols created by humans. They are transcriptions of something heard. Carol listened to Great Ones and wrote down what they sounded like, and the written sounds became tools for humans to use. The rune system is not magic. It is phonetic transcription. The most powerful buffs in the game are the sounds of things humans should not have been able to hear, written down by someone who managed it. The Beast's Embrace rune, which transforms the player character's arms and allows a bestial playstyle, has a description that frames the transformation as a form of liberation. The description does not frame it as corruption. It frames it as returning to something that was always there. The game has a rune that describes becoming a beast as coming home. Whether this is the rune lying, or the rune telling a truth the player character already knew, is the question the rune is asking. The moon rune's description connects blood echoes to the power of the moon and describes the echo pool as a resonant body. Blood echoes, the currency of everything in the game, are described as resonating with the moon's phase. The economy of the game is lunar. What you collect and spend is regulated by something astronomical. The mundane transactions of Bloodborne, leveling up, buying gear, exist within a cosmological system that most players never consciously register because they are thinking about their build. The messenger items, the hats and baubles that dress up the small hand creatures in the game, have descriptions that occasionally break from the game's serious register into something almost playful. The descriptions of cosmetic items for dream creatures suggest that even the nightmare has room for small vanity. The messenger items are some of the only descriptions in the game that are genuinely funny without being horrifying at the same time. They exist to remind you that the people who made Bloodborne are still in there, behind the cosmic horror, putting little top hats on the nightmare hands. The 1/3 of umbilical cord items each have different descriptions that reference different individuals and circumstances. Reading all 4 descriptions gives you most of the game's backstory about the third ending path in fragmented form. The true endings requirement that you find these items is also the requirement that you read these specific descriptions and understand what they collectively mean. The true ending is gated behind comprehension. You cannot access the best conclusion without understanding what the story actually is. The communion rune description describes the sharing of blood as a rite of communion between the healing church and its congregation. The word communion is doing a lot of work here. It is both the Christian sacrament and a description of a physiological process. The church built its ritual language on the overlap between religious practice and medical procedure, and the rune description holds both meanings simultaneously without resolving which one is primary. This is how the church kept its congregation from understanding what was happening to them. The guidance rune description states that it strengthens the visceral attack, that precise and close-range physical openings lead to more powerful strikes. The rune for being guided strengthens the attack that requires you to be closest to the thing trying to kill you, the attack that is most personal and most dangerous. Being guided in Bloodborne means being guided toward proximity with the thing that threatens you. The guidance leads you in, and closer, not to safety. The Dissipating Lake Rune variant has a description that contradicts the base lake rune in a specific way. The base version describes a still lake. The dissipating version describes water in motion. The contradiction is the progression from one state to another. The rune variants are not just stronger versions of the same thing, they are the same thing in a different state. The progression of rune variants is a progression of states, and the states have meanings that the descriptions track across the variants. The clockwise metamorphosis rune family, as the variants increase in power, have descriptions that use increasingly urgent language. The base version is clinical. The second is more pressing. The strongest variant's description has a quality of desperation that the base version does not. Whatever the rune is doing to the person who uses it, it is doing more of it with each upgrade. The descriptions track the intensity of an experience across the family. The air rune, which increases blood echoes from visceral attacks, has a description that frames the inheritance of echoes as a connection across deaths. What you take from something after you kill it is the echo of what it was. The rune that amplifies this inheritance is described as a trace left by a great one. The most efficient way to collect the residue of things that have died is connected to something vast and alien. The economy of echoes has a cosmic endorsement. The Odon Writhe rune produces bullets from visceral attacks. You tear a body open at close range, and the act produces ammunition made from your own blood. The rune named for the formless Great One, associated with reproduction and fluids, makes your most violent act into a generative one. Creation through destruction. The Odin rune is the game's economy of violence made explicit. Tearing something apart makes something else. Nothing is wasted. The Frenzy Blood Gem's description warns that it increases damage but risks frenzy. The risk is stated plainly, and the reward is stated plainly, and the decision is yours. The Blood Gem system is full of these explicit trade-offers. Every powerful modifier comes with a drawback, and the drawback is named. The game never lies to you about what a gem costs. It simply tells you the cost, and waits for you to decide. This is the only system in Bloodborne that operates with complete transparency, which tells you something about who designed the gems versus who designed the institutions. The Great Deep Sea rune, found deep in the Ys Chalice dungeons, has a description that references an undying thing at the bottom of something. The thing at the bottom of the sea did not die. It is unclear if the thing at the bottom of the sea ever could. The rune strengthens resistances against status effects, which means making yourself like the undying thing at the bottom protects you from the world's attempts to change your state. You become harder to alter by touching something that cannot be altered. The rune is a contact transfer of a quality. You get durability from proximity to something durable. The Sinister Rite item, which opens your dungeon to invasion, has a description that frames the ritual as a calling. You are not opening a door to other players. You are calling something. The rite implies that what arrives through it was always out there, was always nearby, was always capable of coming in. You did not create the threat. You issued the invitation. The threat existed. Your choice was whether to call it. Chapter 10. The Hunt, the Hunters, and the Ethics of Violence. The Hunt in Bloodborne is presented from the beginning as a corrupted institution, and yet every mechanical system in the game asks you to be a better hunter. You get stronger, you get faster, you get more efficient at killing things. The game's mechanical trajectory is toward becoming an exceptional hunter, while the game's thematic argument is that the hunt itself is the problem. This tension is never resolved because the game does not want it resolved. You cannot stop hunting. The game will not let you. The argument it is making requires your continued participation. The Hunter's Code, never stated as such but implied throughout item descriptions and NPC dialogue, involves specific prohibitions. Hunters do not hunt each other without cause. Hunters protect civilians where possible. Hunters operate within a framework of mutual recognition that prevents the hunt from becoming pure violence. By the time the player arrives in Yharnam, every element of this code has been violated. The Yharnam abductors take civilians. Henrik turns on other hunters. The bell-ringing women summon hunters as prey. The hunt has consumed its own framework, and what remains is violence without structure. Eileen the Crow is the only hunter in the game who maintains a functional version of the Hunter's Code, and she maintains it by hunting the people who have abandoned it. The code that protects hunters is enforced by a hunter whose job is to kill hunters who have stopped following it. The only thing keeping the hunter community from complete collapse is a woman who has accepted responsibility for ending her own kind when they go wrong. This is a sustainable system only until there is only one hunter left who is still following the code, and then there is no one to enforce it if she falters. The plain doll cannot be killed in any meaningful sense. You can attack her, and she takes damage, and eventually falls, and the game tells you it is a mortal blow. But she returns. The doll does not stay dead. The game built a character who can be killed and is always there. Whether this is a form of her existence that transcends death, or a form of imprisonment that looks like resilience, depends on how you read the rest of her lore. She is always there. The game keeps her there, regardless of what you do to her. Permanence in Bloodborne is not always a gift. The transformation of Yharnam's citizens into beasts is presented as a loss in every individual case, but a process in every systemic description. Individual characters who transform are losses. Entire categories of transformed beings are described in clinical or procedural terms. The game moves between these registers depending on the scale it is examining. When it looks at a person, it mourns. When it looks at a population, it analyzes. This is not a flaw in the writing. It is the game recreating the specific moral failure of every institution in its story. Institutions cannot afford to mourn individuals. They count them. The river of blood that runs through certain areas of Yharnam is not symbolic. It is literal. There is a river of actual blood running through the city's infrastructure. The city's water system, at some point, was replaced by or became commingled with the blood supply. Yharnam's infrastructure and its pathology are one and the same system. The city does not have a blood problem. The city is a blood system. The scourge and the city are coextensive. The hunter who turned into the blood-starved beast in Old Yharnam was a person who wanted the blood enough that they consumed more than a person can consume and remained a person. They starved for it and fed on it, and the wanting and the feeding became the whole self. The blood-starved beast is the endpoint of addiction in the game's bestiary. It is what happens when the thing you cannot stop wanting is the thing that destroys you, and you keep wanting it anyway, past the point where you have a self that can want things. The Shadows of Yharnam, the three-part boss fight, represent a specific kind of hunter team that operated together using coordinated magic, fire, and conventional weapon attacks. They fought as a unit. Whatever they were protecting in that area, they faced it together. The fact that they are phantoms, shadows rather than physical bodies, suggests they died in that location and remained. They are dead hunters who stayed at their post. They are loyal to a duty past the point of their ability to be loyal to anything. That loyalty makes them the obstacle between you and whatever they were guarding. They are the most dignified enemies in the game, which makes them among the most affecting to fight. The Dark Beast is a category of beast that retains electrical properties inconsistent with the disease as it normally manifests. The Dark Beast Parl and the Dark Beast enemies in the Chalice dungeons carry lightning in a way that the lore never fully explains. One reading is that certain beasts that were strong enough or old enough developed this property over time. The electrical energy is not imported. It was always in them, and the beast transformation released it. There is something inside certain people that the disease removes the lid from. It was always there, it just needed the lid removed. The visceral attack animation varies slightly depending on which weapon you are using and which enemy you are performing it on. The variation is subtle, but present. The game's most powerful attack, the one built most mechanically on close-range precision and the player's ability to read an enemy's timing, is rendered differently in different contexts. The intimacy of the visceral attack is specific to each situation. It is not a generic mechanic, it is a transaction that the game renders individually each time. Beast blood pellets, which temporarily trigger blood-tinged damage increases by increasing the beast meter, ask the player to temporarily embrace the transformation that the hunt is nominally meant to prevent. To fight beasts most effectively, sometimes you become more beast-like. The mechanic is explicit about what it is doing. The item description says it. The game offers this openly. The hunt produces hunters who occasionally need to become what they hunt to do their job. The irony is built into the item rather than hidden in the lore. The beasthood stat, which increases when you use beast-related runes and items, grows as you use the transformation that the hunt exists to prevent. The more you lean into the beast side of your nature, the higher the stat goes, and the higher the damage ceiling becomes, and the more fragile your defenses become. The game rewards the embrace of what the hunt condemns with power, and it makes that power conditional on your willingness to become vulnerable. There is no purely safe version of the most powerful form of transformation. The power costs exposure. The church hunters, distinct from the workshop hunters, operated under specific doctrinal guidelines that shaped how they fought. The church weapons are designed for vertical attacks and upward striking motions, as though the enemies they were expected to fight were larger than a person, or positioned below them. The church prepared its hunters for fighting things that were bigger than human. The preparation was correct. The thing they were preparing for was what the church itself produced. The player character in Bloodborne has no voice. They do not speak. In a game full of characters who speak eloquently about difficult things, the one doing all the hunting says nothing. The silence of the player character is standard for the genre, but it is also a statement about the hunt itself. The hunt does not speak. The hunt acts. The understanding of what the acting means is left to everyone else. The hunter is the arm of something. Arms do not explain themselves. Chapter 11. The Great Ones, categorized and considered. The naming convention for Great Ones and kin enemies creates a taxonomy that is never formally presented but becomes legible through accumulation. The celestial mob, the celestial emissary, the celestial larvae all share the celestial prefix, suggesting a shared origin point or transformation pathway. The living failures are failures at becoming what the celestial things became. The winter lanterns are something that arrived at a different destination through a different route. The categories are visible if you lay the names next to each other and read them together. Rom the vacuous spider is a scholar who transformed completely. The celestial emissary is a cluster of transformees who merged. The living failures are patients who almost transformed. The orphan of Kos is a creature born already transformed. These are 4 different entry points into the same destination, and the game presents them all as boss fights, which means it presents 4 different relationships to cosmic transformation as things you are meant to defeat. The game asks you to overcome the end state of the journey. It is also asking you to take. The Great One's interest in children is referenced in multiple item descriptions and is connected to their grief over their own lost offspring. The game describes the Great Ones as seeking surrogates for children they have lost. This frames the cosmic horror of Bloodborne within a register of grief and longing that is deeply human. The things that terrify and transform and destroy in this world are doing so in part because they are mourning. They are vast and alien and incomprehensible, and they are grieving. The horror and the sympathy exist simultaneously, and neither cancels the other. Amygdala, as a word, refers to the almond-shaped brain structure responsible for emotional processing and fear responses. In Bloodborne, the amygdalae are the most numerous visible Great One entities, present throughout the late game's accessible areas. The game named its most commonly encountered Great One after the part of the human brain that processes fear. The thing you see when you have enough insight to see more is named after the feeling that seeing more produces. The creature is named after your response to it. The moon presence, as noted in the original text, has no law, but it has a behavior pattern that is legible. It wants the dream to continue. It wants hunters to continue hunting. It appears at the end of the game if you have not consumed the umbilical cords and it takes something from you. It maintains the cycle. Whether it maintains the cycle because the cycle benefits it, because the cycle benefits humans in a way it understands better than they do, or because it is simply compelled to maintain what it has always maintained, is genuinely unknowable from the game's text. The moon presence is a behavior without an explanation. Ebrietas, the Great One left behind in the Healing Church, has a title that means daughter of the cosmos. Daughter. She is someone's child. The Great One at the centre of the Healing Church's most sacred space is a child left behind by entities even larger and more remote than herself. Ebrietas is the abandoned child who became a religious centre. The Healing Church built their institution around someone else's grief. The cosmos lost something and left her behind, and the church found her and built walls around her and called her sacred. Whether she consented to any of this is not a question the church thought to ask. The wet nurse's name is a title. She is defined entirely by her function. She has no other identity in the game's lore. She nurses. She attends. She protects. In a game full of characters whose names gesture toward who they were, the wet nurse was only ever a function. Whatever she was before she became the attendant of Murgo, the game does not preserve. She is what she does. The lore erased her in the same way the church erased inconvenient histories, by defining a person entirely by their usefulness. The way the Orphan of Kos screams when the fight ends is different from how any other boss in the game dies. The death scream is specific, designed, held longer than the death sounds of any other enemy. The Orphan dies crying out. The birth was violent, and the death is loud, and between them there is a life that was entirely conflict. The Orphan never knew anything except the fight. It was born into it, and it died in it, and the scream carries both. Kos's ghost, visible after the Orphan is defeated, raises a hand. The gesture has been interpreted by community members as a gesture of thanks, of farewell, of grief, and of acknowledgement. The game does not caption it. The raised hand is the entirety of Kos's communication after everything that happened to her. She raises a hand. And then the Delk is over. The raised hand has to carry all of it. It does. The great ones that exist in the dungeon layers, the amygdalae that watch without acting, the sounds that come from below the deepest accessible levels, the entities implied but never shown in the deepest is chambers, suggest that the great ones the game shows you are not the largest or the most alien of what exists. The amygdalae, which are vast and terrifying in the overworld, become passive witnesses in the dungeons. Something in the dungeon makes even the amygdalae into observers. What that something is exists below the accessible floor of the game and has never been directly encountered by anyone. Chapter 12. Endings, Cycles, and What Persists. The three endings of Bloodborne represent three different answers to the same question, which is what do you do when you fully understand the situation you are in? The first answer is, you let someone end it for you. The second answer is you fight what has been controlling the situation and succeed and are destroyed by your own victory. The third answer is you become something that can continue past the point where human beings usually have to stop. The Yharnam sunrise ending, where you accept Gehrman's mercy, is the ending that most resembles resolution. The night ends. The sun rises. You lie on the grass. You are free from the dream. Whether you are dead or simply released is not confirmed, but the imagery is of peace. The cost of this peace is that Gehrman remains. Someone else takes your place. The cycle continues with a new variable. Your freedom is purchased with the certainty that the next hunter will experience everything you experienced. The moon presence ending, where you refuse Gehrman and defeat the moon presence, ends with you taking Gehrman's place. You sit in the chair. You become the dream's new host. You fought to the top of the hierarchy, and the hierarchy absorbed you. The most complete victory available in the standard game is the victory that puts you in the position you were trying to escape from. The resistance is incorporated. The champion becomes the prisoner. The cycle continues with you as its new keeper. The third ending, where you become a great one, is the only ending that changes the cycle rather than continuing it. The doll picks you up. She holds something vast in her arms and speaks to it gently. You have become something that cannot be held in the category of hunter or prisoner or human. Whether this is liberation depends on whether you wanted to remain human. Whether it is victory depends on what you were trying to win. The game declines to tell you. The post-credit sequence of the third ending shows only the gesture of the doll. She holds something. She speaks. We hear her. We do not hear what you have become. There is no sound for what you are now. The transformation removed you from the registry of things the game knows how to render acoustically. You have no sound, because the game has no sound for what you are. This is either the game acknowledging its own limits, or the most precise representation of what transcendence means. There is no longer a frame for you. The frame is the thing that ended. The blood moon, which rises after Rom's death, is the game's central visual metaphor made literal. The sky changed. The moon changed. Everything underneath it changed. The blood moon does not cause the events of the game's second half. The blood moon is what those events look like from the outside. When things that should stay hidden are exposed, when the truth the church buried comes to the surface, the sky turns red. The truth is legible from outside the city. From the sky's perspective, Yharnam's secrets are visible. The waking world versus the dream distinction in Bloodborne is not as stable as it initially appears. The nightmare and the dream and the waking city of Yharnam share material. Enemies, architectural elements, audio textures cross the boundary between them. The boundaries are permeable in ways the game reveals gradually. By the end, the distinction between where you are hunting and what kind of space it is has become something the game itself seems uncertain about. The borders dissolve during the night. The hunt took place across multiple orders of reality simultaneously, and you were not always in the same one from moment to moment. The hunter's dream flowers, which grow more densely as the game progresses, track something. What they track is not stated. They were not there at the beginning. They become more present, whether they track kills, or the progression of the story, or the proximity of the dream to its own end, is not confirmed. But they are tracking something, and by the end of the game, the dream is full of them. Whatever they mark, the dream is covered in it by the time you finish. The final image of Yharnam in each playthrough, either the moment of mercy or the boss fight, is the image of an old man at the end of something he has been doing for longer than should be possible. Yharnam has been managing this thing for an incomprehensible duration. Whatever dignity he had at the beginning of that duration has been worn down by repetition and captivity, and the specific grief of someone who made a replica of what they lost and lived with the replica in a garden while the nightmare continued. The ending of his role in any form is a release that the game presents as ambiguous, but that the character seems to need in any version of events. The cycle itself, the thing the game is asking you to continue or escape or transcend, predates Yharnam. It predates Yharnam. The Thumerian dungeons were part of a cycle too. The Thumerians found the Great Ones. The discovery produced a civilization. The civilization was destroyed by the consequences of the discovery. The survivors left behind an underground record of what happened. Yharnam found the record and built a new civilization. The new civilization was destroyed by the same consequences. The cycle is at least 2 civilizations old, and possibly more. What the player does at the end of Bloodborne is the latest action in a very long process of the same basic things happening over and over to different people who thought they were in a new situation. The truth that Bloodborne ultimately arrives at, through 517 details and everything that follows from them, is that the cycle continues not because of malice or incompetence or even ignorance, though all of these are present, but because the thing that drives the cycle, the desire to understand, to touch something larger than yourself, to reach toward the cosmos and see if it reaches back, is not a flaw. It is the most human thing there is. The church was corrupt, and the cost was civilizational collapse, and the experiment was monstrous, and also, they were reaching towards something real. The Great Ones exist. The cosmos is reachable. The thing the church found was there to be found. The reaching was not the mistake. The mistake was every institutional decision made in the name of protecting the reaching from scrutiny. The knowledge was real. The secrecy was the corruption. And the secrecy was chosen, over and over, by people who convinced themselves that controlling access to the truth was the same as protecting it. This is the argument Bloodborne makes in its architecture, and its audio, and its item descriptions, and its NPC questlines, and its boss fights, and its endings, and its dungeons, and every detail in every texture of every wall in every area of the game. The truth is there. It has always been there. The question is what you do with it when you find it, who you let in, who you keep out, and what the keeping costs. 517 observations, and the game is still asking. And there are more. Chapter 13. Fan Theories, community debates, and the cases that remain open. The nature of Patches the Spider, the merchant found in the lecture building, has been debated continuously since the game's release. Patches appears across multiple From Software games as a recurring trickster character. In Bloodborne, he appears as a spider and part man, selling goods with cheerful indifference to the horrors around him. Whether the Patches in Bloodborne is the same entity as the Patches in other From Software games, operating across universes through some mechanic the games never explain, or whether Patches is simply a recurring character type that From Software likes to include, is a question the developers have never answered. The in-game Patches of Bloodborne has no lore that connects him to his iterations in other games. He is simply there, half spider, selling things, untroubled. The identity of the person Yharnam made the doll to resemble is confirmed by community consensus to be Maria, but is not confirmed by any single piece of in-game text. The case rests on the visual similarity between Maria's character model and the doll's. The description of the doll is made by Yharnam in her honour. The hat worn by a specific small doll figure found in the abandoned old workshop, which matches specific clothing associated with Maria. And the general timeline that places Yharnam and Maria in proximity at a critical period. None of these individually constitute confirmation. Together, the community treats them as conclusive. From Software has not said. The question of whether the player character is an outsider who came to Yharnam for the blood healing, or a Yharnam resident with more complex origins, is never definitively resolved. The opening of the game implies the former, but the insight mechanic, and the speed of the player's progression through events that would destroy most people, suggests either exceptional luck or exceptional pre-existing quality. Some lore readers argue the player character is already something unusual before they arrive. The game offers this ambiguity deliberately. Your character is whoever you need them to be for the journey to make sense to you. The debate over whether the hunter's dream is a kindness or a trap is one of the oldest in the community. The case for kindness is that it provides hunters with a place to rest and recover, that the doll is there to support them, that the equipment and leveling system represent genuine assistance. The case for a trap is that the dream prevents hunters from ever truly resting or dying, that it extends the hunt past any natural conclusion, that Yharnam's desperation to free himself from it suggests it is not what it appears. Both readings are supported by the game's text. The moon presence's involvement ensures that the question cannot be answered without deciding what the moon presence wants, which cannot be answered with certainty. The nature of the blood ministration, the process that seems to happen to the player character before the game begins, is one of the starting points for extended lore analysis. You signed a contract. Something was done to you. The old blood was introduced to your body. Whether this process explains your resilience, your ability to visit the dream, your specific vulnerability to insight-related perception changes, or some combination of all three, is a question the game raises and does not close. The tutorial area shows the beginning of the process. What the process completed is visible only in retrospect, only after you have experienced what you apparently became. The relationship between the three endings and the umbilical cord mechanic is one of the most discussed structural questions. The umbilical cord is described as a connection between a mother and a child that carries something of the Great Ones. Consuming three cords, which are remnants of three separate births connected to Great Ones, changes something about the player character's state in a way that makes the true ending accessible. What it changes is not explicitly described. You are different after consuming them in a way the game registers mechanically without naming directly. The community's dominant reading is that consuming the cords makes you into a vessel for something, similar to what the Pthumerian queens were vessels for, and that this is what allows the transformation at the end. You became a container. The transformation filled you. The Mikolash dialogue about eyes on the inside refers to an aspiration toward a form of perception that does not require eyes on the outside of the body, a form of inner sight that the Great Ones possess. The phrase "eyes on the inside" is one of the most quoted lines in the game, and also one of the most analysed. The eyes of the umbilical cord, the insight system, the transformation at the true ending that is framed partly in terms of seeing, all connect to this central image. The game is about seeing, and what seeing costs, and what you become if you see enough. And Mikolash, screaming his philosophy in a nightmare he built for himself, is asking for the thing the game is about in the most direct way any character manages. The community's ongoing analysis of the Bloodborne lore is itself a demonstration of the game's central argument. People keep returning to it, they keep finding things, they keep cross-referencing and debating and arriving at interpretations that differ, and then finding common ground, and then disagreeing again. The game released over a decade ago and is still being read. This is either a testament to the depth of the design or a testament to the human need to find patterns and complete stories in incomplete materials, or probably both. The reading continues because the game rewards continued reading. It was built to. The severed hands in the Thumerian dungeons, already mentioned, deserve a second pass here because they represent the category of Bloodborne detail that resists every interpretive framework the community has tried to apply to it. Not everything in Bloodborne has been explained. Not everything has been understood. Some things are simply there, in rooms that were carefully designed around them, and what they mean has not been recovered. The hands are the reminder that the game still has secrets that the community has not reached yet. After a decade of looking, there are still things that have not been seen clearly enough to understand. The Bloodborne community's habit of calling the game's creator Miyazaki-san, or simply Miyazaki, is itself a form of the Bloodborne dynamic. They know the name of the person who shaped the thing. They do not know what he intended. They can see the work and name the maker, and the gap between the name and the intention is where all the interpretation lives. The game was made by people whose intentions are not fully available to the people who received it. This is the position of every character in Bloodborne, relative to the Great Ones. We know their names. We do not know what they meant. The final unanswered question, the one that sits beneath all the others,